That's the wrong screen. Perfect. All right. Everyone can see, I assume? Yes? Excellent. So this is our last week really diving into CSS, okay? We're going to continue to build on the things that we learned over the last 3 weeks, building HTML and CSS websites. This week is going to be kind of a blur because we got a lot of content to cover, and a lot of it is stuff that you're not going to do on a day-to-day basis, but it's important for you to be aware of. And we'll play with some ways to like experiment with it and just have a little bit of fun. So, we're going to talk about animations. We're going to start diving into responsive web design. We're going to really just take a look at all the ways that we would craft our websites to display in the ways that we want. You were looking at some of the examples at portfolio pages last week, and one of the guys had a fancy little light star field that was spinning around behind the scenes. You can do all of that with CSS. And while I'm not a designer by any means, it is something you should be aware of, and you should know how to look it up, how to conduct research, so that you can apply this to your own properties in the future. Okay. But we are going to go pretty fast because we lost an entire day, and so please feel free to stop me if you want to dive into in more detail. Okay. Next week we're going to start learning about JavaScript, and that will be really the focus of the rest of the course. So once we just make it through this week, everything will be all fun from there on out. All right. So we've been talking about responsive website design. Does anyone remember what responsive means in the context of web design?
It reacts to like if the window gets shorter or smaller.
Excellent. Yeah, that's exactly right. And really how that's going to affect you on a day-to-day basis is whether, most people when they're using your websites are not going to be going in there and dragging stuff around like this. But what will matter is if they're on a phone or if they're on a tablet. The window itself probably won't resize dynamically, though we are going to use that ourselves when we're testing our products. But most of our users these days, as we kind of mentioned over the last couple of weeks, we're seeing a pretty big shift in the industry of people showing up to your websites with mobile as their primary way of interacting with your pages, right? Especially for things that are public facing. This is a necessity. If you do not design your product with responsiveness or fluid designs in mind, you're going to have nonstop bug reports that are going to bother you day in and day out. We've kind of explored ways that HTML by itself is already fluid, right? So when you drag and resize a screen, by default by default HTML is going to gracefully, we were playing with silly examples in week 1 where we just had paragraphs of text, and as we made our screen smaller, the text was correctly wrapping and forming itself around on the page, responsive to that change in design. But as we started to experiment with CSS and we started putting in things like absolute units and saying, I want this navigation element to be 250 pixels wide, that type of thing breaks that default behavior that your users are going to be accustomed to. And so as we look at being more responsive intentionally this week, this will be a big portion of how you design your websites going forward. The first way we're going to look at doing that is to use the media queries property. This is something that's going to be available to you both in CSS and as how you can structure your CSS files that you're linking to in your heads. Okay, and that's what we're going to spend the first part of today looking into is media queries. The other thing I would caution you is that as we're moving into this week of content, to start focusing your efforts on relative units in CSS as opposed to the fixed units. I mentioned one of the fixed units. You guys remember some of the other fixed absolute units that we talked about last week? There was a whole bunch of them.
There's EM.
Okay, EM is one of the relative units. What were some of the absolute units? And I'll give you a hint. One of them was PX, pixels. Do you remember? There's like 6 or 7 other ones. Andrew, do you remember?
There was inches and centimeters.
So there were.
Yeah,
there are
Australia got
pixels,
inches and centimeters. Yep.
Yeah, actual units of measurement, and then I feel like there's another one.
Yeah, millimeters, pixels, inches, centimeters. I think there's point as well is one of them. Point, picas, whatever that is. In all of my years of doing software development for the internet, if I'm going to use an absolute unit, it's almost always going to be a pixel. But as we explore what we're going to cover over the next couple of days, learning about using flexbox and grids, and even as we continue to build on our portfolios and some of the projects we've been working on together for fun, we're going to start moving away from using absolute units so that our so that we don't have to fight against the browser as we move from desktop to mobile to tablet and as we play with responsiveness. Now, there's another thing that I want to just introduce the concept to you about. I myself am terrible at this. Almost always I start building a product, I'm building it for my computer. I expect people to use a browser. There is a design methodology that has become very common, and you'll probably work with some of these people as you enter the workforce, which is to design for mobile first and then to increase the experience for people on browsers. I generally work the other way, which is start from a browser on a big desktop and then work my way down. Both are correct, but the mobile first design methodology is one you should be aware of that exists, right? So you can, whichever way you feel most comfortable working is perfectly acceptable, but I just wanted to expose that to you as we start talking about some of this stuff, okay? Any questions? No? All right, we're going to dive in. So media queries, right? A media query is a really cool thing that actually existed a long time ago, and we used to use it for a number of interesting things, one of which I'll bring up today. But it basically gives us an attribute that we can put in the link tag that we use to associate to a style sheet, and we can specify what type of interface to load that media query for. And the first one that I wanted to give you an example of, because I used to do this all the time, right? So this is how we've been writing CSS up till now, right? And if we load this on a web page, 127. So this is the product we've been playing around with. Everything looks great. If I press Control P, right? So I want to print this. This is what this is going to look like, right? The printer view is the exact same view that we're using for our website. Okay. But the very first media query that I would interact with in my previous jobs would be, I would say, I'm going to make a style sheet that is specific to printing, right? So I'll say link rel style sheet, href equals css print.css, and then we say media equals print, right? So now I've told it that if I'm a printer, use this style sheet as well, because CSS is still cascading. It's going to load this one and this one, I believe, but we're just going to verify that just to test, right? So I can come in here, we're going to make a CSS file, and I'm going to say this is called print.css. And what I can do in here, just like any other CSS file, I can come in here and let's say we want to remove our nav bar, right? We don't want the navigation to show up when we're printing something to the website. So I would come in here and say display none, right? And so now, without having to do anything to our page still works exactly the same way. If I click print, you now see that our navigation element has disappeared. That was the very first thing I ever used media queries for. Back in the day, you used to build like your regular website, and then you would remove all the extra stuff, the navigation elements, so that you had a nice printable view, right? And that's a really easy way to do this. One thing that was pretty common back in the day, especially if you were working on like a blog or you're working at a newspaper website, if you wanted to have a tutorial that was printable or an article that was printable, you would remove all the extra stuff, and then you would remove like advertising, right? You don't need to print out an ad that is clickable if there's no sense to interact with it and try and win $100 by hitting a monkey or whatever the ads used to be. So that was a pretty common use case, and we would do that all the time. How this also works is that any of the things we put in this attribute here is using a media query. Okay, so we have print is one, all is the default, right? So when we have a regular CSS file loaded, it's basically doing media equals all. This is all, it just says it's going to apply to every browser, if I'm printing, if I'm on a tablet, if I'm on a whatever, okay? Display is if we want it to just be if I'm on a computer, okay? And then print is the third option, right? So if I click this right now, where I've said this top one only loads on the display, and this bottom one only loads on print, when we go back to our print version, what do we do wrong here? Let's make sure we're using the right thing here. I might have told you an incorrect thing. W3 Schools, media. Oh, screen. Excuse me, screen, not display. So screen is, this is a computer or this is a browser, right? And so if we view our fitness tracker now, we see that it's got that color, but if we print it, we're going to lose some of that information, right? So you can technically, and I've seen people do this, especially for, if you're building a website that was supposed to be printed, you might spend a lot of time and energy crafting a really nice printable interface so that when people go and print the page, they get something that is very pleasing aesthetically. You might change the font. You might increase the font size so you can have a specific number of letters on the page. Whereas in our example here, right, like obviously the product is kind of a generic thing that we've been building. But if you were a newspaper or a blog, you might spend quite a bit of time working on your display, your print style sheet. Everyone tracking along so far? Cool. I think it's important if we talk about media queries next, right? So there's another way to access this information, right? We don't have to do it just through that attribute. You can do it inside of your CSS itself, okay? And the way we would do that is we can come in here. Let's pull up our activity CSS. Let's take out this. Let's take this out. Well, let's leave that for now. We can come in here and set an @media query rule that would apply to any type of thing we wanted. So we could do @media, and you can see this just lets us put rules inside of it, right? We've got our brackets just like we've seen with other CSS, except the one major difference is that you're going to put entire selectors and rules inside these @media queries, right? So we can say, for screen, it's this. I can come in here and remove this element, right? So now our print CSS has nothing in it. And if we went and verified here, if we print, right? Control 2. Our nav should show back up. Where did it go? Oh, because I'm on. Great. Let's take this out. Yeah, let's just do all, right? I'll leave this here for now. Oh, I'll leave this here. All right, so when we're here, right, if I print, yeah, our nav shows back up. But what we can do is inside of our media query, if I'm in CSS, I can say media print. I can come in here and add the rules inside my file. So I can say nav display none, right? And it's doing exactly the same mechanism that we were doing with the two separate files. Everyone tracking along so far? And if we reload this page, right, and I print, you can see that it does indeed work. Okay? Now, where this gets interesting and where this gets kind of complicated, and you just have to know these rules, and there's a whole bunch of examples that you can use in here, in the W3 schools, is that we can specify screen and then a set of criteria. And the ones you're probably going to use most often are these two. So let's just do this. @media screen and min width. I think we actually have to put this in. Yeah. You put these in parentheses, right? So we'd say min width is 600 px, right? I think this is accurate. Let's just see if there's a, yeah, exactly this. So we can say, hey, anytime the browser screen is at this size, this minimum size, do something different. And so we can put a whole bunch of different rules in here, right? You can also do the same with max width. So we could say, anytime the screen exceeds this size, do these set of rules. And so a great example of this, let's see, let's do min width first, right? So I can say, what do we have our background set here, right? So we have, I'm just going to show this off of the body because we spent time making this little dark red background. So let's say background color is green, right? So now, when I view this page, if I open up my developer toolbar so that we can play with this element, right? Right, we can see, how big is this? So as soon as we, oh, I can't go below. All right, let's change this to something more. Oh, because I didn't put it on the body, right? So you have to put the rules and the entire selector statement has to be inside these things, right? So you can have any number of them in here. Right? I could put different link colors as well. I could say color 000, right? So now when we go below that threshold, it changes the background color to green, right? So any number of rules, right? When we're talking about designing for responsive first, or for mobile first, if you wanted to take that approach, I would come in here and make a media query that says, hey, when I'm on this type of device, and you can see these devices if you click on the toggle device toolbar, right? It tells you the dimensions of those devices. So if I wanted to say target an iPad specifically, then I would want to target a width of 768. So I said, if it's ever 768, right, I'm going to assume I'm on a tablet. And so what you'll generally do is have a bunch of rules that are set together so that you say, when I'm on this size of device, display the full screen. When I'm on this size of device, I'm going to display a smaller screen. So we can make it this responsive. Right? So we can adjust our appearance based on the size of the device that is viewing it. See how we can do that? And so a good list of devices is in here. It's going to show you their widths, right? So an iPhone 5 is by default 320, and you can see it's getting our crazy green version of this product. Okay. Whereas an iPad, right, would get the full version, right? And sometimes that's what you want. You know, stuff looks really good on an iPad generally. It's got a large size viewing area. So you might want to have your desktop version of your product match on iPad. Okay, but on a phone, which much smaller interface, the other thing that jumps out, yeah, right, when you're on a phone is the font is pretty hard to read, right? These are small, you have to have it up here closely, right? So one of the things that is really common when you're working with smaller screens like this is you'll come in and say, you know, font size is 32px, right? So we're going to set the root font size for everything else. And so now you can see, hey, when we're on an iPhone, it's easier to read and it's easier to interact with, right? Whereas, you know, when I'm on an iPad, right, it goes back to just desktop size. Any questions about this? You can chain lots of these rules together, but in general, what I find most often is that you're going to say screen and then either max width or min width, depending on which way you're designing. If you're designing for mobile first, you might go one direction. If you're designing for desktop first, you might go the other. And you can have multiple of these rules, right? So you can come in here and say, when it's, let's do max width 600. What was the iPad was like 1024, right? So we can say, you know, if I'm on an iPad, it's purple. And as soon as you go above that width, it goes back to the default value. Right? Everyone see how we did this? Cool. Now, as I've mentioned, I'm not a designer. I don't spend all day doing this stuff. So every time I need to go and figure it out, I often, exactly like you saw me do just here, I'm figuring it out as I go. I'm going to play with it, tweak it till it works. I'm going to iterate, reload, until it behaves the way I expect it to, right? Now what we've got is, because we changed from min width to max width, all of our rules that we wrote for mobile are showing up at full screen on a browser, which is probably not the behavior we wanted, right? And so I would come back in here and say, okay, let's make this max width, right? And now it should, in theory, go back to, yep. Except I can't make my screen small enough. Cool. Any questions? It's also important to note that any number of elements can go in here, right? So in between these queries, you know, you can continue to add CSS rules. I would say that there's, as a good rule to kind of follow by, is if you're going to have more than 10 or 15 selectors in here, it's probably best to put it in its own separate file and then put it in here. Okay? Because another thing that you can do with this media rule here is that you can also put screen and max width 600px, right? So all this stuff we were putting in the CSS here, right? The display type and then some kind of query, you can put in the actual attribute of the link element. So you can put these rules. If you're going to set up your if you're going to have a whole bunch of specific rules to a specific browser or a specific device, I would encourage you to put it in its own separate file so that it's easier to work with, and embedding it this way. Okay. Any questions? No. All right. Yeah. See, here's some good uses, right? Like a regular widescreen monitor is going to be anything above 1200 pixels wide. Standard, which is like a regular desktop that you can expect to see in the wild, is anywhere between 769 and 1200. Your tablets are going to generally be in this range. Mobile is going to be anything less than 500 pixels, and so, and then sometimes you might want to, especially on mobile, you might want to have a different type of design if they're in landscape mode. So if they're looking at the phone horizontally, like held up like this, right? You might want to display your menu, and you might want to display more of the content, and you know that because it's going to be longer than it is tall. Cool. How does this relate to us as we're building stuff? Right, we're going to start using the CSS units that are relative. Right, so this is the big one that we spent a little bit of time talking about last week, but it's harder to come up with good descriptions of how you'd use these in practice. So we're going to just play with a few things and maybe start to explore some of these units. The first one is, the first thing that's important to know is that all of these are multiplicative, right? That means that the value of the element is being multiplied against some other value. So in the case of EM, right, this is relative to the font size of the element, right? If we try it here, it's going to give us the best possible example that we can play with, right? So all of these are paragraphs. They have a font size of 16 pixels. Okay. Then there's a div that has a span inside of it, and the span is where we're actually defining this font size. So right in this example, they say the font size of the div is 30 pixels. Right, you can see it here. This is big, but the span inside of it has a font size of 0.5, and that value is multiplied against the font size of the element it's in. So we can see here that they have a 0.5 EM defined as the font size of the element, which means that if the font size of the parent element, the div, is 30, then the font size of the span is 15, right? And we can play with this all we want, right? So if we make this 0.1, it's 0.1 times 30, which would be 3, right? So if we run this, now we can't even see this text. But if we make this, let's say, 0.9, right? This should be almost as big as 30. It's probably like 28 or something, right? Even though the text doesn't follow it. Yep. Everyone tracking. That's how the EM font size works. It's going to take the current value of this EM and multiply it the parent value. So when we're playing with CSS values in here, right, rather than setting this to be some large number, where do we have it? Right, 32px, we could set a font size here for what was this, purple, in the purple view, yeah. So we can set a font size here that is 32px, and then say, everything else on this page, right? Every other p is going to have a font size of 0.5 EM. So it's going to be multiplied by the default value. I would have to have picked it on that. I have to say R again, but that's fine. We'll get to that next. Right? Everyone tracking? Okay, the other big unit is REM, which is what I was just trying to play with, which is relative to the font size of the root element, right? So the root element in our CSS is almost always going to be HTML. So the way we would use this is that we would want to come in here and define a rule that says, hey, for everything in this document, the base font size is 16. Sometimes they'll call this the base font, right? And so you'll define a font size that the rest of your layout is going to base itself off of, so that when we start to build responsive designs, all of our units can gracefully get bigger or smaller based on the size of the display we want to work with. So in this case, we can have 16px. This is the base document. Then we have a div that is inside of, so a div by default is going to have 3 rem. So it's going to be 3 times 16. And then this one, top div specifically, has 2 rem. So that's why this one is smaller than this one, because it has a special rule that says this is 2. Everyone following along? Okay. I would encourage you, and I might even make this a homework assignment, is to come into this page specifically and try out all of these examples, because they're all very important. And we're going to cover VH and VW as well today. So we'll play with them on here. It's really hard to like set these things up as an example better than they do, better than W3 schools do, right? These are like really concise examples. You can play with it, see how it works. Change this to 6 rem, right? Change this to 0.5 rem, and see, just click the run button. So you can start to see the relationship between using a unit that is tied to another unit and how that reacts when we're playing with page size. Got it? Is there anything else? Yeah, cool. All right. So if we wanted to put this into practice, right, when we were learning about setting up our CSS files in the first place, we kind of use this star to mean, hey, apply this to every element. We probably want to put a rule at the very top of each one of these CSS files that says, HTML, and we want to say font size 16px, right? So now we've set a base font size for all of our document. And if we come over here, we still have all the crap overwritten. Let's take out all these media queries. Reload our page. Yeah, it's back to normal. Everything looks great. But how we'd want to go about this now is I would get this in here. Let's take this out. Great. So let's add a media query. It says at media screen and min width 500. Right, so we've just given ourselves a media query that will exist between those two sizes. So I'm going to come in here and say, what are we going to do? Background color green. Right, so we have a page that should, between a certain, I don't think that's how you nest them together. Let's take this out.
You gotta enclose it in another set of squigglies.
Oh, that's true. Yep, thank you. See, this is how infrequently I use these.
No, the background color part.
Oh, yep, you're right. So we need to make this body. Thank you. Perfect. So now we can see we made a version that only shows up between two specific sizes, between 1024 and between 500. So this is the kind of nesting that we can do with these media queries, and it's going to be really important as we continue doing design specific stuff for mobile. Okay. So we've got a body. This is inheriting the base font size that we set up above. So by default, these should all be around 16px. But let's come in here and say font size 0.5. Right. All right. So if we've got a base font size, right, you can see that when we're in this view, when we're in the mobile view that we created here as an example, all the fonts have updated dynamically with that screen size. Cool. All right, view height and view width. So what is the viewport? We've kind of talked about this, and I've used a bunch of different words for the viewport. What does anyone think the viewport is? Any ideas?
Either the size of the device that you're using or just the actual window that's open.
Yeah, that's it. And really, for our purposes, the viewport is this area in here between like the top of from the bottom of where the browser information stops and the bottom of the page, right? So this is the viewport. And when we were playing with that, if I pull it up again, when we were playing with these sizing things here, shoot, I have inadvertently, stupid thing. When we were playing with this sizing information, you could kind of see this up at the top right of the screen. That's the viewport dimensions. So everything that is between, like, the visible area of your web page counts as the viewport. So when we talk about, some of these relative units, right? One of the ones that we mentioned last week is view width and view height. And we can play around with these by when we're setting up. We want to have the fonts gracefully contract and increase based on the size of the view height. You can see that as I shrink and increase the size of this hello here, it's going to follow it, because we've said the font size of the H1 is tied to 20 times the view width, right? So if it's going to be each number that goes in there is 1/100th, 1% of the view height, right? If you can think of it as slices of the page, there are 100 slices, and so you can go anywhere from 1 to 100 in here, right? So we went 100 and run, right? Our hello is going to be whatever the width of this area is. That's how big our hello font size is going to be, right? So each of the letters is going to be one entire width of the page. You can see we can only see the H as we go along, right? If we made this something like in the original example 20, right? It's going to increase and decrease here as well. And we could do the same thing with our P's, right? So we can have a P tag, and we can say font size 10 view width. Right? So now everything on the page shrinks and grows with our content, or with our viewport. Okay, you can see that up here. Any questions about this? This is a really powerful one. The other one is view height. That's the same thing, right? So as we shrink this up, right, you see the hello does not change, but if we grow and expand this window, that's where it grows, right? Cool. And that's set up the same way. It breaks the viewport down into 100 sections, and then each number that we put in here is 1% of that total height. So we made this one 100. Right? So now we're going to have an H that is the size of one page. And as we shrink. Following along? Cool. All right. Advanced selectors. We talked about a few of these last week. We talked about descendant selectors. So let's see if we have an example here that we can play with. Right. So, right. Let's make another UL in here. So, P, second list below. P, UL. I am in list 2. Right. So now, if we view our page, got all that stuff in there, right? We can see we have. Let's take some of this out. We got 2 separate lists, right? So when we've been styling this in CSS, we can come in here and say something like, we have it's an activity log, right? So we can say div activity log, and then we want to target just the ULs and then the LIs, right? So we're going to say any LI that is inside of UL, inside of div activity log, is going to get a font color yellow, right? So we should expect to see, color yellow. Font color. Yeah, so everything's yellow. But if we wanted to get just the first LI, we could do that by saying the direct descendant, right? So it's going to be just the ones that are in here, right? We can also, if we wanted to have this not work, right? If we wanted to have a sub list, we can come in here and put a UL, UL, LI. This is not yellow. except it's yellow. Doesn't make any sense. It's supposed to be direct descendants. You dang liar. Why is this not working? Oh, direct descendants. I don't know why that. Let's look it up on W3 Schools and see if we can figure this out. Selectors. I'm sure they'll give us a good example that we can use. Of course there's not. Okay. Oh, okay, because it doesn't have a parent over it. Doesn't make any sense. That's what we have here. Why is it not working? Alright, let's try their exact example. So we're going to make a paragraph. We'll say this should be white. Right? Then we're going to make a div and put a this should be yellow. Okay. If we come in here and we say div p color yellow. Yep. Oh, everything's yellow. Turn this off. Yeah. Cool. So I don't know why it wasn't working here. I'd have to figure out what's wrong with this one specifically. But the direct descendant, when you use a greater than sign like this, or angle bracket that's pointing to the right, it's going to say this is only going to apply as a rule to elements that are specifically under the top element. So in this case, div with a p under it, right? In our code over here, we have one div with one p in it, right? And so we could put a second p in here, right? I could say this is also yellow. Okay, if we come over here, yeah, that is also yellow. But if I come in here and I wrap one in here and I say span not, I put a p inside of a span, right? This is not yellow. Let's make this look pretty. Yeah, so that one will show up as not, and we can put another p in here and be like also yellow, right? And we'll get exactly what we expect. I don't know why this UL one wasn't working when we were playing with it. I'd have to ID activity log UL. Right? I don't know. That should have worked. CSS is wonky. But that is a direct descendant, right? There's another kind we want to take a look at, which is directly after, right? So we could come in here and say, all right, so we've got every P that is inside this div is yellow, but I can go in and say, the first P, the next P that comes up, I'm going to have that color be green, right? If I can type green. And then what we'll see is, now that one that was previously white is now green. Where did it go? This should be white. It's directly after that div, right? So as soon as you get the end of this div, the next element that comes up is going to be P, right? And we could come in here and say P div activity log, right? We could say P plus activity log, right? Because activity log is directly after that P. We could say color, let's say background color CCC, right? We're just going to make it gray. And so now you can see that element that happened after this paragraph is now a background color of gray. Any questions? Descendants, children, these things, you're going to use them occasionally, but it's important to be able to target individual elements if you wanted to not, the way that I do it most of the time, I'm not using crazy selectors like this 90% of the time. What I will do almost all the time is anything I want to style, I'm going to come in here and either add a class to it or I'm going to add an ID to it so that I'm targeting individual elements directly rather than relying on we've always got to make sure that our HTML has the div after the p, right? That kind of thing is more prone to breaking, but I just wanted you to be aware of it in case you see. Oftentimes, when you're working with designs, you will see these types of descendant selectors and selectors like this used in the context of menus, right? Or navigation, when you're talking about, like, you know, every time I've got a U that is inside of a nav, right, I need to be able to, for every sub element, you might want to style it a certain way. Okay? And then the other thing that we did take a look at last week was the attribute, that is selectors based on attributes, right? So we learned about input, and then we could do type equals text, right? That was one of the selectors we played with a little bit last week, but this is just an attribute type of selector. And you can put any attribute in here that you want, right? So we could say background color red, right? So now our log input, right, has a background of red. What other, can we do it on any attribute? Let's check that out. Let's do, what other attributes would we use? Yeah, I mean, so let's try it by value. Yeah, cool. So any attribute, you can attach it with square brackets, put in the value or the attribute name, and then equals. If you're doing something that has multiple words in it, right, you're going to want to wrap it in quotes like we did here. If I can find my screen. Right, so I put track exercise. That's because the value of that button is track exercise. Cool. All right. Yeah, we're chugging along at a pretty good pace. Anybody want to go over any of these other examples? You want to spend more time on this before we chug on? No? All right. Pseudo selectors. This, again, is more advanced CSS stuff, so you can look at the first element, the last element, the nth element. And a good example, you will see this used pretty often with lists specifically, or like, you know, if you wanted to style, if you were doing like an article on a newspaper or something like that, maybe the first paragraph is a bigger font so that it like jumps out at you, right? So we would say, let's see, UL first child, and let's say font size 32 px, right? So this is going to say on the very first child of this, like, we're going to make the font size bigger, right? If we actually come in here, let's look at that. They probably have really good examples for us to look at. So let's go first child. Yeah, so here they've got the first P, the P first child, the background color is yellow. So that's the first child of body. And then this is the first child of the parent element, right? So anytime a P happens on this page, the first version of that is going to be yellow, right? So if you wanted to style the first of something ever, you could come in here and say like div, right? And we could put this in here anywhere, right? So we could say span, hi, span. And then we could put another div, P. This will also be yellow. Right? So the cool part about this type of rule is that it's going to follow you throughout this entire page, right? It's a complicated selector that is always going to have this happen. The same is true of last child, right? We'll just stay on this page, right? So now it's going to do the exact opposite, obviously. It's going to say, give me the last P inside of an element, right? So the very first one didn't get styled background color yellow, right? That was the difference here. But this one right here, because it is the last P in this div, it does get styled. This one also does not. And I'd be willing to bet that if we put another P down here, right, test, this one will as well, because it's always going to get the last one. You can also pick, there's an nth child. Let's see if they have a good example for that. Nth child. Okay, and nth child just lets you put in a number, right? So if you wanted to have it happen on the second one, let's go back to that example. So we could say nth child, but we have to provide a number. So we can say 2. Right? So in our example here, we probably want to do li first child, right? If we wanted the first element only to be large, right? It's going to hit that top. Gosh, made it gray. That's hard to see. Take out the gray. So if we want to make the very, like in the context of our activity tracker, if we wanted to make the most recent activity big, you would do first child. But we could also do it to, let's take out all the other stuff. All this nonsense. All right. Right, so, right, you can see that the first child is big, but if you wanted to, for whatever reason, you know, let's say we've got 5 things in this list, right? We can pick any number we want with nth child, and so nth, we're gonna see the letter n used pretty often in computer science specifically, but especially as we dive into JavaScript next week. N just means like some unknown number that I'm going to provide, and in this case, we can provide any number we want. Right? We can say 2. It's going to be the second one. We can say 3. It's going to be the third one, right? We can move on down the list to whatever we want. And you'll notice that in the other list, right, there is no option that's big because we don't have 3 children here, right? But if we put 1, this would make the first one. Nth child 1 is the exact same as first child, and last child would be whatever the total number of elements in the list, if you wanted to specify it yourself. But I don't think I've ever used this on purpose before. I'm trying to think of like a real world use case where you'd want to do that. Maybe menu items. Yeah, like you can see up here, this one got big because it's also an li. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've ever used that on purpose. Maybe we'll explore reasons to do that in this course. We can maybe invent some. Cool. Let's close some of these extra tabs. Get all this nonsense open. All right. Cool. Even, odd. Well, that's neat. So it's telling us here. Let's see. Nth child. So apparently, if we can put in words in here, even, let's make every other one. Yeah, cool. So you have a couple options in here that are pretty neat. So this would be a really good use for this, right? If I was trying to think of like, what would be a real world use case of this? And the one that jumps to mind using this nth child specifically, where you have odd and even, is we can design a table, right? An HTML table, and expect it to have hundreds of rows, but we want every other row to be a slightly different color so that it's like really easy to read. I would use this for that. Generally, you know, when I'm doing this, I almost always do it with I would put a class on that and be like even or odd when I'm writing my loop. But this is better. This is much cleaner. So I might start using this from now. Right. That's cool. See, we learned something new today. All right. What else? How's everyone feeling so far? Pretty good? Awesome. On to my, yeah, all right, before and after pseudo selectors. All right. Before we dive into this, I think now's a good stopping point. Let's take a quick break. I'm gonna go turn on my air conditioner because it's like 1,000,000 degrees in here, and we'll come back at, let's say, 6:05. Good. All right. See y'all in a bit. Boop. All right. I am tired of us working inside of our cool little activity tracker, so I'm going to build a new project real quick and give us just a blank week 3 template so we can start exploring some of these things a little easier without having to hunt around. So I'm going to make a folder first, new folder. I'm going to say week 3 CSS. Okay. I'm going to open the folder, week 3 CSS. And what we're going to do here is create a new file, and we're going to go select language, HTML, and say boop. Alright, so we got ourselves a document. I need to save this, huh? Okay. File, save as, index.html. Right. I'm going to make a folder in here, CSS, and I'm going to make a new file called week3.css. Great. So everyone tracking? We're all right here, caught up. We've just created a blank project. Nothing special or fancy in here, but we're going to say week 3, and then we're going to include our style sheet. Rel equals style sheet. href equals CSS. week3.css. Okay. So if we view this in our live server, we should see a blank page, right? Exactly. Let me pull this out, make this smaller so you can all follow along. Okay, so all I've got here is basically just a blank canvas for us to explore pseudo selectors with. All right. So what is a pseudo selector? Let's add in a heading. Call this page CSS file. Ahref equals page2.html. Link to page 2. So we got a very unstyled page. If I click link to page 2, it's going to be a 404 because that page doesn't exist. Let's make another link to page 3. Page 3. This one's going to show up blue, right? So that's the default style. We played with this a little bit last week. By default, things are blue. When you've gone to it, it's purple. Okay. Now, the first thing we want to introduce here is the pseudo selector for visited, hover, and links. So if we were in here and we wanted to make all of our links a different color, let's say color is, let's just pick a nice blue. Blue. Right? Let's use a color selector. Pick something pleasant. Okay, so we've got. Oh, to be fully. Yeah. So we want all of our links to be this cool color of teal. Right? So now by default, even the one that's visited. Oh, that's a terrible color. Let's pick something better. Come here. Perfect. Even the ones that are visited now are all blue. We've said every link on this page is made blue. But we want to have that behavior of saying, I visited this link, it's going to be purple, or whatever. We have what is called a pseudo selector. And so this is going to give us attributes about the selector we're talking about. So in this case, if I put a : and then visited, right, this is going to be how we style any link that has been visited. Right? So I can come in here and say, if I've been to a page, let's make it purple. Right? That's kind of the default behavior. Right, so now we've got this exactly how we would imagine, right? For any link that has been in our browser's history, it is now going to be purple instead of blue. Okay, does everyone follow along? This is a pseudo selector, and it's always going to have this format for the ones that are built in. Okay, there's another one that's really important, especially in terms of links, which is hover, right? So we can say color equals red, right? So now anytime I'm hovering over a link, it's going to change to red. Okay, now let's see. Hover is down further than visited. If we put this up here, what is going to take precedence, hover or visited? Right. So now, visited is still going to be purple, even though we're hovering over it, because hover is up higher here, right? Does anyone remember the special value we could put in here to make this take priority over the other one? We learned about this last week briefly.
Important?
Yeah, and it's with an exclamation point. Yep. So now hover is going to take priority regardless if it's visited or not. Does everyone follow along? Cool. But this also works on anything, right? So I could do, let's put in a div in here, right? So let's say HR, and we're going to put in a div and give an ID of hover. And inside this div, we're just going to make, let's put in some lorem, right? 25. So it's got some, oh, forgot to hit tab. Oh, shoot. Right. So it's got some lorem ipsum text. I'm going to press Alt-Z to make it word wrap for me so that it doesn't make my editor look awful. So we've got ourselves an element here. If I came in here and said div hover, right, so a div with an ID of hover, and I come in here, oh, Selena's food just showed up, nice. And I say background color is green, right? Let's make it. All right, so we've got a light gray background. But now I can come in here and say div hover, background color green. Right? So now I'm hovering over this div. I've just changed the background color of that element, right? The same thing that works for links works for any element on the page. Now, be aware, there's no way to have visited a div, so the visited pseudo selector will not work, obviously, but you can use hover to start changing the flow of how things function on the page. One of the ways that this is really useful is if you have a whole bunch of interactable elements, right? So sometimes you'll come in here and say, on hover, we're going to change the cursor to pointer. Right? So if we were writing JavaScript and we wanted to make it so that this, there's some indication that you can do something with this, maybe we've now changed the pointer. If you notice, it's now a hand. Right? So that's the kind of interactivity you can put in with CSS using pseudo selectors like this. There are a few other pseudo selectors that are really element specific. One of which is let's add an input checkbox. Right? Input type equals checkbox. Value equals whatever. Right? And I'll put a little label here. Checkbox. Right? There is an option. So this is just regular checkbox. If we wanted to do input checked, right? You could say background color green. Right? So now if it's checked, didn't do anything. Let's see what W3 Schools has to say about checked. They probably have a good example. Checked. Okay, they make theirs bigger. Right. So yeah, we can't set a background color. So let's just use size equals 25 px. Right. So if we try it now in our editor. Wait, what? Didn't work. Height. Oh, they're doing height. And width, I guess, is fun too. Maybe that's 25 px already. Oh, there we go. So you can see we can make these bigger. There's some things you can do here. If you were wanting to and we'll learn about this when we learn about the magic pseudo selectors before and after. You might be able to swap this out completely with a different image. There's some complicated things you can do with this. To your heart's content. I don't think I've ever used this either, but it's there, and so that is the checked pseudo selector. Okay. Let's talk about fun things you can do, right? So we have our CSS is fun H1 up here, right? And that is, do we give it an ID? Let's give it an ID. Equals heading. There's a special type of pseudo selector before and after, right? And so what before and after do, if you put in 2 colons, right, we can do before, and there's a few special CSS properties that I want you guys to be aware of. The first is content, and I could put in here Eric, right? And so what that's done is that's actually added content to our HTML page because we use the content property. Okay, and it's put it before the H1. You can also do the after special pseudo selector, and it's going to do the same thing, but in reverse. You can put all kinds of content in here. A great example would be here. Let's do it with our div, right? So we have our div with hover, right? We can do content. Oh wait. Let's do hover. Content. We can do content. Right? So when I hover, that didn't work. How would I show this off? Well, let's just do before. We'll say content equals I am hovering over this box. Right? So now when I hover, it's adding that content to the top of the box. And you do the same with after, right? So it's a way for you to add content with your CSS to these pages. Okay. There's another interesting thing you can do with these pseudo selectors in that. Let me see if I can find an example real quick. You can also add images, right? So we can add in here, let's say, background URL. Let's just do unsplash.hit 220. Let's put in some content in here. Boop, boop. Right. It's hard to show up there. How can I show this off easily? Oh, I got it. So what we can put in this in the content box is content, right? So we could take a URL, which we learned is a link to a resource, and I could put this in here as content to add when you hover over it, right? So what I've done here is I've said, hey, load this image from this URL into this box. So when we view this page in our browser, you can see that it's trying to load a giant one. Let's make this smaller. Let's make it 400. It's going to load an image, right? And it's going to load a different image when I load this page, right? Every time I load, it's going to load an image in that box. Let's make it 200 so it's easier to see, right? So you can move things around, and you can add content, both images and pictures, in this way, right? So the other day we were talking about we wanted to replace all of the LIs with an image, right? And we were using list style image. You could also do it this way, and you're going to say, hey, list style type is none, but before every LI, I want to put an image, right? How did we do that the other day? Here, let's add one real quick. HR. And we'll say UL. List item 1. List item 2. Right. All right, so we've got our regular old list in here. If we were to come into CSS and say, hey, for every LI, I want list style none, right? But then I can come in here and add a pseudo selector and say LI before, and we could even come in here and this could be ridiculous, right? We can have content asterisk, right? So we can manually add our own things. We were talking about adding a smiley face the other day. Let's find that smiley face. Unicode smiley face. Right? So I can copy this. Okay, so I've actually got an actual smiley face in my code here, and now you can see. I haven't hovered over it. Now I've replaced all of my list styles with a smiley face image, right? And it still appears like it's part of the page, but this is behind the scenes. It's just being added with CSS. If we inspect this element, it's going to show you that information in our visual inspector. You can see the before, and it's going to show you what that content is, right? So you might often see this kind of information, this pseudo selector, show up in this information here, because it's showing you, hey, before is this, and we could put both of them in here, right? We could do li after, and put a frowny face. What's a frowny face? Frown. Copy this, and I could say, hey, at the end of my thing, I want to have a frown. And we can see now we've got a frowny face at the end. And when we inspect this in the visual inspector here, if I select this item, you'll see we've got a before that tells us what the content is, and an after that tells us what the content is. Okay? This is really powerful. Oftentimes, if you're working with a menu or something that drops down, you might combine a few of these together, where you've got like something that hovers and you want to change the direction that it goes, like down arrow. Right. So let's just pick a modified letter down there, right? How can I show this off easily? All right, let's do this. Imagine, if you will, that these are. Let's make a new one. I'm gonna say HR. Well. LI menu 1. LI menu 2. LI menu 3. Okay, so we've got a. Oh. we got to be a little bit more specific. Class equals fun menu. Right? So let's not have this take effect. Let's say fun menu. Fun menu. Fun dash menu. Fun dash menu. We got our class symbol, right? All right. So we've said list style none applies to both lists. So this second menu has none of that extra stuff, but the fun menu has the smiley face, frowny face. Okay. But if we were making a real actual menu out of this, let's give it an ID. We'll say ID equals menu. Right. We're gonna say menu li, and we might come in here and say after, and we'll say content is let's actually use a right arrow. We'll use this one. So at the right of all of our menus, we're going to have this thing, but we want to have it so that I can tell that I can click on this, right? So maybe what we have is we say menu li hover, right? I'm using a built-in pseudo selector, so just one colon, and I'm going to say cursor equals pointer, and I will do background. Oh, let's do font style. Let's do font weight bold. Right. So when I hover over one of these menu items, it makes it bold. Okay. But maybe what we also want to do is on hover, we want to we want to change the content to have a down arrow. Right. So I would come in here and say down. Let's get the other way. Right. Right. So now you can see that there's a thing here, right? But what we can also do with these pseudo selectors is, let's say that there's submenus under each of these things. That's why we need a down arrow. Okay. I'm going to come in here and say ul li sub menu 1 li sub menu 2, right? And let's say that this sub menu is going to have a class of sub menu, right? So by default, right, when we load this page, you can see the sub menu inherits those same rules as well. But you'll also notice that the down arrow is at the very end of the sub menu, right? Which is probably not what we want, but for the sake of just chugging along, right? It's because this submenu is inside the li, and so when we use the after pseudo selector, it puts it after all of the content in here. But what we probably want to do is we want to come in here and say submenu is hidden by default. Submenu display none. Right? So now when we load this page, we can see that there is no submenu. But when we do, we could probably do menu li hover submenu display block, right? So when I hover over this, now we got a submenu, right? And it's a really bad example because we put all these little down arrows in there trying to be cutesy. But let's just let's take this out. So we can combine these rules together. So I'm gonna take this. I'm gonna say menu li hover sub after, and we'll say content. Right. So when we're hovering over a menu, we don't want that down arrow at all, but we still want the other arrows, right? Pretty cool how we can, like, we've just created a submenu just using CSS. Now, there are better ways to do this, and when we get into JavaScript next week, that might be something we'd explore, is how to make this interactive, how to add some styling on this. You know, we might want to come in here and say the submenu itself has a border 1px solid blue, right? So that it adds some visual styling around the submenus. We might want to have these main menu items be menu li float left, so that the menu itself kind of follows that kind of flow. This will do. Let's play with it. Yeah, cool. Any questions on pseudo selectors? Right. So the main thing to be aware of is that the built-in pseudo selectors, which is visited, hover, checked. What else? There's a few others here. Let's pull up a list. Pseudo selectors. Oh, first child, last child, nth child. We played with a few of those earlier, right? Like those all are used with a single colon after the tag. And it could be any type of tag, right? So we could do this after li, or in our case above, div, right? Div hover. But it could also be by ID, so we could do menu hover, right? Any valid selector, you can attach a colon and use one of those pseudo selectors. And pseudo just means like fake, right? Like not real. It's not a real selector. We're doing something special. The other special type, and this is the one that we introduced, that uses, so this is a single colon. And then double colon, right? So you're going to use it with 2 colon signs, is before and after. Right? And you can combine, you can mix and match them, right? We can say on hover and add after, or on hover and before. And then inside of those, we learned that there's a CSS property of content, which lets you replace the content. And you could put in anything you want there, right? We could put in any kind of text. So we can hover and say, Eric has fun menus, right? Any type of content we want can go in here. So you can go kind of crazy with some of these things. Yes, go ahead, Gregory.
Can you say what was the double colon for again?
Double colons is for these special pseudo selectors. These are still pseudo selectors, but they're for, they're like, I don't know if there's an actual name for these. Yeah, I don't know if there's an actual name. It's just a special type of pseudo selector that lets you do things before or after.
In what context?
What was that?
In what context again?
In the context of any selector. So any selector that you can think of, and we know of selectors is IDs, classes, tag names. Any of those types of selectors can have a pseudo selector attached. So in the example we did above, right, we said the div, the element we have, it's a div, and we said, hey, when you hover over it, like this is a built-in pseudo selector, so it's got a single colon, we're going to change it to green. And so our example here is when I hover over this, it becomes green. You see that?
Okay.
But the special ones, after and before, those have 2 colons. So this one, right? When we said before this, when we hover it and before, put in an image. We could put that with the content concept.
So when we go to her website, before we hover over it, will show an image, but after that, it won't show the image?
The before here means before the content, right? So it's saying when this element is found, add this content before it, right? So you can say,
Oh, basically, when did that content found when it's uploading, load this image before anything else?
nope. No, it's talking about before the rest of the content. So this lorem ipsum text that's in here is the content. Before the content, put in this image.
Okay.
We can change this to after, and it'll do the same thing, but at the bottom, right? So after this content, put in the image. You see? It's talking about before and after the content that it goes in. And we were looking at that in the inspector. If we come in here, we can see, oh, I have to hover. That's a pain in the butt. Yeah, we'll go to one of the ones at the bottom. You go. Right? It's saying, so this is the content of this list item 1, right? We said before list item 1, and you can see it's highlighted here. It's saying li before is a smiley face, li after is a frowny face. Go ahead, Selena.
I looked up the double colon versus the single colon for that, and off of the one thing I looked at, it says it's to establish a difference between pseudo element and a pseudo class.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, so this is a pseudo element. It's creating a fake element in here, and that's what. Yeah, I couldn't think of the term. Thank you. This is a pseudo element. This is a fake element that was created inside this element. And I think there's a few other types here, right? If we do div, and we just use our browser here, right? Backdrop, before, content, queue, grammar error, part. Like, we'd have to look all these up to see how to use them. I have never used any of these, so let's just look one up on W3 Schools. What was one of our examples?
Do grammar error or spell error.
Let's do grammar error. Yeah, let's see what happens. Grammar. Type in the box. Grammar error. Let's. W3 Schools doesn't have that as an option. Let's do grammar error. CSS. There we go. The grammar error pseudo element represents a text segment which the user agent has flagged as grammatically incorrect. So this would be like if you're writing a
text,
like a
paragraph.
text editor.
Okay.
My friend, but it doesn't even work in their thing. So I guess this is like it's something that's a work in progress, but not supported by the browser that we're using, right?
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so this is it says in this example, eventually supporting browsers should highlight any flagged grammatical errors. So our editor knows that this might exist in the future, and is showing that as an option. But Chrome, this version of Chrome doesn't have it. So a lot of these things that are in here is about stuff that doesn't exist yet, right? So let's look at the other one, content, right? This is the one we were kind of playing with before. Let's see.
Good question. How does something exist but doesn't exist yet?
What was the question?
How do something exist but doesn't exist yet?
In the context of web development and programming languages in general, the agency that is responsible for writing the language and defining the terms that everyone agrees to often will spend months or years talking about what stuff they want to add to the language. Okay? But until all of the browsers actually implement it, it's just a working draft, right? So they're saying, we're going to add this grammar check pseudo element. They defined how it's supposed to look, but none of the browsers have actually made it work yet. So you might be in a browser, and Chrome is a great example of this. Like when we were looking at W3 Schools, and you see all these levels of what support they have, right? Browsers from before this version, like if you went to Opera 6, it would not support this after pseudo selector. Now, we're mostly focusing on like modern web development in this class, but when you get into the real world, like you might want to use something fancy that only exists on one browser, but your customers are using an older browser, and you won't be able to use it. So it might exist in the language, but not exist in the real world. Does that make sense? Cool. So let's look at the content pseudo element, because I'm curious about this one. Here's another good one. First line, you can change the first line of any paragraph, right? You might want to use this occasionally. So let's add a paragraph and play with this. Right, we have our paragraph here. So if we go to P, which was, where was it? Let's take all this stuff out. What do we call our thing? Right, so P. Let's just P. First line, font, style, italic. So this is just going to make the first line of this content be italicized. And the cool thing is, because this is automatically, you can see that it's growing. The amount of things that are italicized is responsive to our browser, right? So those are the kind of cool things you can do with pseudo elements like this. And thank you for reminding me of what that name is. I don't use these often enough to know all the terms. But you can see if we went in here to this P, for whatever reason, the first line is not showing up in our inspector as a pseudo element like it was with before and after. So this is a great example of like Google Chrome has implemented that this is a pseudo element, right? The first line pseudo element, but they have not implemented it in their inspector to show up the same way that first line did. Right, so you can't see that little purple thing. So that's another. It's just like weird. Like when you're working with this type of CSS, this is stuff that's on the fringe, right? Like sometimes not going to work in all browsers. You're going to play with it. So it's really cool and it's fun. Like you could do a lot of really interesting things with this stuff. But there are other and better ways to do this sometimes. Another example that we had from before, when we were talking about nth child, right? We were talking about tables. This is how I would use that nth child stuff. I'd come in here and make a table, and let's say th, right? Tr, right? So tr. I'll say th, name, email, right? H. Oh, this is supposed to be tr. Alright, so we got ourselves a table row, and let's say this is a big table full of content, so we'll just make a couple of rows real quick, and we'll say TD Eric, TD Courage at the Clubhouse, and we'll say 37. Right, now let's say you have a whole bunch of rows here. So by default, we're going to get like a really ugly table. Oh, my menus are floated. Here, let's do HR. Alright. So I've got this table. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say tr nth child, and we'll say even. We'll say background color. Yep, that's a good color. And we go in here and say TD border MPX. Right. So we got ourselves a nice table. But now if given every other row has this color, right? Every even row. And this one counts as an even row because this is the second row, right? Because we have our heading up here. So if we wanted to make it start from odd, we'd actually say from odd, which doesn't make sense necessarily. And then we probably want to come in here and say, th, right? So our table headings, we want them to be of a different background color. We'll do something like 777, like a dark gray. Right? So this would be how I would design and style tables nicely. The alternative way, what I've always done for most of my career over the last 20 years, is I would do this in code, right? I would actually I'd be looping through these, and I'd be saying, this is an even row, this is an odd row, and then I would come in here in CSS and say .odd, background color, whatever, RGB, whatever, okay? And I would have the classes, like when I'm looping into my JavaScript or my PHP on the back end, the thing that is generating my HTML table would be caring about whether or not I'm going to change the style. But this is much cleaner, right? We can do this just in CSS. Go ahead, Gregory.
How does it recognize what is odd and what is even?
Magic. I don't know. Yeah, whatever the CSS engine is smart enough to know I'm talking about whatever child, so it's going to count them as it goes, and it builds the document object model, and it's putting that in there. This is relatively new. Like, this didn't exist 10 years ago, I don't think. So, I don't know when it came in, or I would have been using this a long time ago. Someone comment something?
Yeah, I was showing how you can start from a certain point, or
yeah. And so you could do, in this case, n+6. Let's do n+3. Let's see what that does. All right, cool. So the third row down, right? Or in this case,
and then try -3.
Yeah, -3. Cool. Let's do -6. This is going to start from the bottom, work its way up. No. What if we just put in a negative number?
It should work.
Yeah, that's cool. It didn't, but
Let me look at it.
Are you
Try
pressing save?
negative n plus 9.
Negative n plus what?
Yeah, negative n plus 3.
Oh, yeah, cool. So starting from the top then. Oh, it's only going to go up until then. Right.
Yeah, so like if you put the number in, it'll go from that section down. So you pick 4, it'll go from the 4th row down.
Oh, yeah, that's neat. Yeah, see? That's super cool, right? I don't know if I'd ever use that for anything, but it's neat. I try to frame, like, when I'm learning about all these things, right, like, I've never really needed to use this before, and so I've just never cared about it. But now that we're learning it together, like, I can see the use for even and odd very, very clearly, because I can think of all the times I've built a table, and I'm just displaying 1,000 rows. I just want to be able to have it do nicely alternating colors. But some of this weird stuff, like, I don't know where I would use this or why, but it's neat, and I'm glad that it exists. Can anyone think of anything they would ever want to, like, start counting like this for? I don't know. Go ahead, Andrew.
Maybe if you were displaying like the results for a race and you just wanted like the first 3 places shown, like first, second, and third shown, and then everything else is just
That's an excellent
doesn't matter.
Or if you had like an unknown quantity of people in a tournament, right? And it's like the top 10% is going to win. Couldn't we do percentages in here?
Yeah.
Let's say like 10%. Or n plus 10%? That didn't work. Let's look this up. Nth child percent. For n. Selects every 4th element. Oh, cool. You can skip stuff too. So if we did 3n, right? Instead of alternating every other row, it's going to do every other row. So if you had a couple of different rows, so I could do this 4. That's neat too. I can think of some uses for this. Percentages. How would we do percentages? Is this an option? Odd. 2n, 5n, 3n plus 7. Holy cow, you can get complicated in here.
Well, not my problem.
Yeah, pretty cool. But it also shows you like what browsers support this, right? So it's been in Chrome since version 1. But like Chrome 18 on your mobile phone, right? So when we're talking about mobile devices, if this is functionality you're relying on for your users and your customers, you probably want to make sure that it exists, right? Like Internet Explorer, the answer is no. So if you've got a bunch of old warehouses that need to use your product, right, you probably want to use a different method. Cool. It'd be neat if there was a percentage, because then you could be like, no matter how big the table is, give me the top X%. But I suppose you'd have to count somehow. But I like this skipping thing. That's neat. And I like odd and even. Those are cool too. When I'm learning these, that's kind of what I was saying, is when I'm learning these things, I'm trying to put it in the context of stuff I think I'm going to build using this technique. And so, the example we were playing with last week that we're going to continue playing with forever, like an activity tracker or a fitness tracker or something like that, I could build this, and I could see myself building something like this in the future. So I'm trying to think of like, the first child. We were talking about using first child. Like whatever you put in as the most recent element to that list, we want to give it a different style. I could see that. And so I'm trying to frame it in the context of this is what I'm going to build with that thing. Some of these, like, I don't know. It's cool that it exists, but I struggle to think of how to use it. Cool. All right. What else? Pseudo selectors. Great. And then we learned about before and after. And then background image overlays. So there was some background image stuff that was put in the homework, and there were some questions around this. Do you guys want to spend some time with some background images? I also, very quickly, I'm going to share this link with you. This is an extremely useful tool. And what this tool does is it lets you embed an image, and you saw me use it over here. Lets you embed an image of any size, and that image is going to be different every time you load the page. So it gives you a very clean way to just quickly put pictures on your pages that when you're building them. And so the examples here is if you click on this, it's going to give you an image of this size. If you click on this, it's going to be a square size. So they give you a couple of really good examples that you can click on. But when you use the code and you embed it in your page, right? So let's come here and we can just say image source equals, right? If we were to load our page, we will see that this image loads onto the page, right? But the other cool thing about this is that this is saying the seed, right? So we want to use the other one. Well, that's doing a specific image. So let's just add a, let's take out all the other stuff. And so if you take out this and we just put in just dimensions, right? So height and width, then it's going to give us an image of that size that is different every time we load the page, right? So that's a really cool way when you're starting to mock up, like we were talking about, hey, we're going to build a portfolio and I want to have little placeholders for where my stuff is going to go. I might come in there and just say, I just need a little tiny placeholder image, and I'm going to come in here and put this, right? And they have some other really cool features in here, like if we wanted to add blurring. Where is their example? Yeah, like grayscaling, or if we wanted to blur it, right? I can come in here and just say blur, right? And so now our image in our browser, right, is blurred now, right? So it still shows an image there, but it does not take the focus off the content that you're working on. So this is really good for putting placeholder images into your content, and we'll use this kind of thing as a tool all the time. There's a whole bunch of examples like this. What is another one that I use pretty often? Let's see. Gravatar is a great one, right? Gravatar as a product is really cool. If you've got an email address, you can plug in Gravatar and it will return an image of either a person's profile picture or like a generic like profile photo head, right? And so we'll use stuff like this going forward when we're starting to build actual products. So there's a whole bunch of resources like this that let you embed images really quickly. There's another one called Placehold It that I used to use pretty often. Placehold It, right? Which is very simple. It's going to generate like just a blank gray placeholder image of any size that you want, right? So you can come in here and say, I'll show you an example. All right, so right now we have this blur image. If I was to come in here and say image source equals bloop, right? Now we got a little 150 by 150 placeholder, and I think it uses the same format, right? So you can do 150, 300. No, that didn't work. How did it tell you to do it? You put in you can put in text in here as well, right? So these are really useful tools for you. I'll share the links to both of these so that you can use these when you're building your websites. You can change the colors and stuff. So these are really useful. I really like the this Pixum website because they give you just a random photo that loads every time the page loads. So this is great for your profile page if you wanted to make like a really nice background image. So that was like a dark picture that's like not a part of your website, but it's different every time. This can really spice up and spruce up your content. Any questions? We've played a little bit with some of the pseudo elements and pseudo selectors. We learned about hovering. We learned about before and after, so we can add content and then get crazy with making things weird. Eric has fun menus. We learned about some nth child stuff. Anybody want to go over any of the stuff that we've talked about already? No? All right. All right. Well, we're actually ahead of schedule, so I think we'll just probably start jumping into flexbox. Let's do this. Let's do 6:50. Let's take another brief break, just so I can make sure I have all the content ready for tomorrow, or for the next little bit we're gonna do. So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here. Yeah. All right. Let's take like a quick 10-minute break, and then we'll dive into flexbox and how we can use that to make our layouts a little better. So 6:50. Come back at 7. Cool. Flexbox. Let me share my screen. So this is a relatively new thing. So I'm going to say this with the caveat of being, this is all this stuff that we're going to go over today and over the next couple of days is stuff that will work in modern browsers, but if you're working on older legacy software that has to run on specific older products, it may or may not work, and so your mileage may vary. So what I did here is we just created a blank HTML page. You know, the method we've been learning up until now is kind of the old model of how you lay out a website. And so if you look here, let's make sure. So what we've been doing up till now is we'd come in here, we'd say div id equals main, right? And then we would come in here and we would add we'd add another div, and maybe we say, let's just for the sake of being quick, background color is CCC, right? And we'll say float left, right? And then width 200 px, right? So we'd say menu. Oh, I don't want it to make a menu. Stop this. No. Menu. All right, so we've been doing this for the last couple of days just to show off, like, this is a method of laying out your web pages. If you wanted to add another, like a main content area, you'd come in here and say div style, background color. Let's do 555, 444, right? Float left, width 600 px, right? So this is content, and we'll say, right? So we've been going over this for the last couple days. It's too big. 300. Right? So if we wanted to have elements next to each other, we'd take a block level element, float it, and then force its width to be a certain size. And we learned that we can do this with percentages, so we can say, hey, 10% of the page is actually, if we wanted to use relative positioning, relative units, we can say 10% of the page is the menu, and 60% of the page is content, right? That was the old way. But what I want to show you is a new way that is pretty cool. And so let's just give ourselves a little space here, so we can look at both in order. We'll say clear both, right? Because we don't want our content to be there, right? And let's just add some spacing, just to be extra explicit. Okay, so what we can do is there is a new type that is introduced in CSS 2 or maybe CSS 3. But what we're going to do is we're going to give this an ID, and we're going to say this is container. Right? Okay, so there's our div, right? It exists here. Let's create a CSS file. So let's just, for the sake of making it easy, container. We're going to say background color is like CCC, right? Okay. Let's put some content in here. Main content area. Okay. So you can see we have a gray area. It's a box. It's not doing anything special. Okay, but it's taking up the full width of the page, except for there's some margins here, right? If we inspect this element, and we look at our computed style, we can see that there is. It's on the body, right? So we're getting a margin of 8 on the body. But if let's just take that out. All right, so we're going to say body margin 0, padding 0, right? So this goes the full width of the page. So that's the setup for this, right? We've created ourselves a container. And then what we would normally do in these containers is the same thing that we've been doing up till now, right? We would put in a couple of elements in here, and let's just say div class equals item, and we'll say something here, and we can put a couple of these in, right? The default behavior, as we learned with a block level element, is that it's going to take up the full width of the area, and if we, just for the sake of dot item, we'll say border 1px solid green, right? So we're just giving ourselves a green border. You can see these are all one on top of another, and they're just squishing it up, okay? And they're taking up as much room horizontally as they have available to themselves. But we have a concept now called flexbox that gives us a whole bunch of controls for the elements that exist within inside of a container like this. So what we would do is we've learned about display block, right? That's the default for a div. We've learned about display inline. This is the default for a span. But the new display attribute that we have is display flex, and you can see what it does immediately. As soon as you do it, it says any item that is inside of this that is normally a block item is going to smush itself together, right? Everyone tracking so far? Cool. All right, so we've got these elements in here, but they're not really positioned in the way that we want. So we have a few other CSS properties that we want to take a look at, and we're just going to go through these kind of one at a time and show off what they do here, because there's a whole bunch of complex concepts in here. So we have justify content is a really good one, right? So this is talking about how the content is spaced inside these boxes, right? So we can say flex start, right, is the default, so nothing has moved, but I can do flex end, and it's going to move all those boxes to the right. Let's put some different size content here, right, so we can see how this grows. Something bigger here. Look at how cool I am. Right, and maybe for this one we're going to put in a UL, right, so we can have like a list of elements. Let's put in li test li test 2. Right, so you can see that the bigger box is going to take up more space. The box over here on the right takes up as much space as it needs, and this box here on the left takes up as much space as it needs. So it's changed how these elements flow inside this page automatically, and this goes with as much or as little size it has available, right? It's going to try and gracefully degrade and be responsive in this element, right? So we've got our 3 elements in here. We have flex end. What else do we have? We have center, right, which is going to center them so that there will be equal amounts of spacing on the left and right, but each of the elements in here is still taking up just as much space as it needs, okay? Everyone following along? That's center. We also have space between, right? And that's going to do the same thing, but it's going to say go to the far left, go to the far left, go to the far right, but try to give me a little bit of extra space in the middle, right? So you can see now, we've just created the same kind of elements that we were doing up here with floating, but we haven't had to do anything to earn it, right? It's coming for free with display flex, okay? What else do we have? We have space around, which is going to be even better than space between, because it's going to put the same amount of space in between every element and the page, right? So we got just as much space here, just as much space here, just as much space here, and over here, right? So it's automatically controlling all the margin and padding that it needs when we use space around. And then the other, the final option is space evenly, right? And that's gonna, it's gonna try and maintain proper distances between each of these elements with any extra free space that it has, right? So the ones that I think are the most useful really is space around, right, which is good, and center. But there's a whole bunch of options here that you should be aware of because they're really powerful. What other things can we do? Align items, right? That's another useful one. Here, let's add some more items here. Let's just add a bunch of stuff in here. Boop, 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 boop. Right, so we got a bunch of boxes. And you can see now they're starting to look kind of nasty, right? We're running out of room. So how do we make this move things around so that there's fitting on multiple lines? The way we would do that is with flex wrap, right? So if I say flex wrap and I say wrap, right? Is that going to do what we want automatically? No. So I'm missing a semicolon. Yeah. So now what we've done is it's giving us extra lines and it's trying to position things around the page, right? So if you're trying to build something like Pinterest, right? If we were in here, here's a great example. Let's come in here and say image source equals, what was it? Let's pick one of these images, right? Right. Boop. Let's make this smaller, 100. Let's go with boop. Right? So you can see that these images are going to kind of follow its way around the page because we've told it to wrap and take up, as much space as we can, right? So you can see we've just gotten for free something that we used to have to worry about manually, okay? And then there's also, with flex wrap, we have a few things. No wrap is the default, right? So this is going to squish everything on a line, and if there's no extra space to squish, it's going to carry off to the right. Wrap is what give us that, it's going to give us these lines, right? So that it gives us, it's going to fit as much content as it can, and if it can't, it's going to go to the next line. And then there's wrap reverse, which is going to do it backwards, right? So now it has completely flipped all those elements that were in order on our HTML, right, into the opposite way. So all of our images now are at the bottom, and it just goes completely backwards. Is everyone tracking? But in general, you probably want to have wrap. That's important. What else? Flex flow. No, that's not important. All right. Align items. So if we come in here, we can say align items. Right? And we have a few different options. Stretch is the default, so that's what it's doing already. That's what's causing it to stretch out to be as much space as it needs. But we can also say flex start. Right? And so now this green box, did you notice that this border, right? This box, because the elements that are on this line with it was, you can see the green border was around it all the way up there. But if we say, hey, we want align items flex start, right? It's going to take away that extra stuff. It works also the same as flex end. Right? It's going to put it at the bottom. And then there's also center, right? So in each line, when we're talking about whether the element itself, if there's a smaller element, right, it's going to move it either at the top or the bottom or in the middle, center, right? There's a whole bunch of options in here. Start, right? Baseline, right? Last baseline, right? I don't really ever use many of these, so oftentimes if you're just wanting to center a bunch of elements like this, I might just stick with center. But what you're going to put in these elements is going to depend almost exclusively on what you're trying to build. So if you're trying to build Pinterest, you probably want each element to be about the same height and width. So let's come in here and say item height. What do we make our image? 200? 200? 100? So let's say 100 px width, 100 px, right? So now we're forcing every element to have the same size and shape, and then our grid behaves predictably as we move around the page, right? Can you guys kind of see the value of something like this? Align content we covered. Align items. Okay, so align content is going to align the flex containers information when there's extra space. It's very similar to justify content. So if we come in here and we say align content, right, we have a few options. Flex start. I don't know if that's going to show. Let's take out justify content. Maybe it will show up better. Right? Yep. Flex start. Flex start. Normal is the default here, so we can come in here and say normal. Okay. We can do flex end. I don't know if yeah, it's not showing anything. Anyway, those are the main things you're going to use with this, right? There are a few other things to be aware of, right? We can change the ordering, and we can change the direction that we flex, right? So by default, when you do flex, it's going to do row, right? But we can also say flex direction, and we can say column, right? So instead of being left to right, it's going to be top to bottom, right? And then it's going to be based off of the height and width here. How would I show that off? Let's see. That one's tricky to play with. But let's just change this back to the default value, which is row. All right, any questions with flexbox?
Flexbox is where it changes with the movement, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That is one of the ways. There's another way, which we're going to learn later this week, that is really more for layout purposes, and that is CSS grids, right? So we can actually set up a grid and say the left grid is for my menu, the right grid is for my content. Flexbox is really if you have a whole bunch of items on the page and they're all you want the page to like you saw kind of when we were playing with some of these sizes, like the size of the content of the box can change, and the boxes themselves will move around based on the screen size.
It's malleable.
Yep, completely malleable. But we had changed height and width here to be, right? So if we didn't have height and width there, right, this content, assuming, like if you're making Pinterest or if you want, like for your portfolio, you might want to put in flexbox information here so that you don't have to worry about positioning elements. You can come in and say like, this is project 1, this is project 2, in your HTML, right? Like, as long as you have an item inside of a container that has been set to flexbox, like this could be image source. What is let's take an image here, and we can come in here and say, you know, image 150, and we can come in and say cool website I built, right? So you can build a bunch of, think of it as like cards, right? You can build a card and put them in a container and say, I don't care how many cards you can fit on the page. I don't care what device I'm on. Just show me as many as will fit in this box nicely. And then the elements that you have to work with inside of CSS, like align content or align items, whether you're centered or, you know, start, flex start, right? Whether they're at the top or at the bottom or they're centered, like all of those things are within your control. Whereas before, we would have had to like float things and make sure we were clearing them so that you didn't have extra lines being smushed on top of each other. This is a much cleaner way to think of positioning, like just letting the browser take care of how many things it can display at a time. Cool. As I mentioned, this is perfect for portfolios where you have a list of items. If you were working on a website that had like testimonials, right? You had a whole bunch of boxes with quotes and maybe a picture of somebody's head. You know, the content of the quote might be bigger or smaller based on who's saying it, right? Like, here's a good example from work, right? If I go to our landing page, right? Like, we have these 4 elements in here, right? We didn't want to place these elements in a box like this. It's going to take up, like, if we're in a bigger view, we're going to see all 4 of them together. But as we shrink this up, right, these automatically drop into a size that is pleasant. And if we went even smaller, you know, it would go completely horizontal, right? So in the context of a responsive design, when you're working on a big space, you maybe want to display 10 items at a row. And when you're on a tiny browser, you might want it to go all up and down vertically. Flexbox gives you that control and that flexibility to really place things there. Any questions? But there are so many, like we touched on some of them, right? So display flex is the first thing you have to have, right? Flex direction is important. It's telling you if it's a row or a column. And there's a few other options in here, right? If we type in flex direction, column reverse, row reverse, you can inherit from a parent element, but row is the default. Align content, right? There was a whole bunch of options in here. Center, flex center. So there's and then flex wrap that tells you how to wrap things or to not wrap, right? You could say don't wrap ever. I don't know why you do that because that kind of defeats the purpose of flexbox in general, but if you wanted to, you could tell it not to wrap. You could tell it to reverse. So if you had a big list of items and you wanted to just sort, like here's a great example of how this could be useful, right? Let's say you've got a list of items in this element and you just wanted to like revert, like maybe it's a list of folders, right? You could wrap reverse and you could set that in CSS so that it sorts it backwards, so you don't have to write any JavaScript at all to change the order of the elements in this list, right? We could do this with an unordered list of elements, right? If we had a bunch of links on a page, we could say, you know, we click a button up top and it just changes the CSS to say wrap reverse and flips them around. And then align items, that's another interesting one. You're going to need to use that pretty often. I think these are the main ones. These 5 properties control most of what you'll ever want to do with Flexbox. Okay. What else could you do with Flexbox? Any ideas? Can you think of a scenario, like a real world thing you would build besides like building a Pinterest clone? What would you use Flexbox for, maybe? We talked about possibly using it as a portfolio, possibly for quotes. Were you going to say something, Leah?
You can have like a deck of cards and like have the cards like have spaces between them when like they're in your hand or something.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent use. Like if you're building a card game and you wanted to have a hand, and then you wanted to have like if you're playing poker, maybe there's the community cards in the middle, right? You could just there's nothing stopping us from designing a nice card, right? Like let's do item, let's card. Let's do different. Right, so we can come in here and with CSS say dot card, right? We do border 1px solid 000. We could say background color FFF white, and then we could say height 300 px, width 150 px, right? So we've kind of created like a rectangle, so this could be our card. And so instead of saying something here, it could be like Q. What's a heart? I don't know what a heart symbol. Let's see. Let's look this up. Yeah. There's got to be a heart in here somewhere, right? Yeah. And so we can say card has background, or let's say color red, right? So we've just created ourselves a card, right? It's an ugly card. Let's say height 250. So we've created a card. We could have 5 cards that are equally spaced nicely. Let's do that exact thing. Take everything else out. Let's give ourselves a royal flush, shall we? Jack, queen, king, ace. Right? And if we were displaying our hand, there's our hand right there. Right? And if we went in here and we said we would make this look pretty, what was it? What was the thing that gave us the space between correctly? Justify content, right? We took that out. Space evenly. Okay. Now we got ourselves a nice pretty hand. And if we were for some reason on a very small computer, right, we'd have them be vertical. So that is a great example. What else can we do with flex boxes? What other things can we think to build?
Maybe if you have like an e-commerce page and just
great.
different.
Yeah, product listings. That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
So you're building, a better version of Amazon. You're going to build the next, $700 billion company. You want to have a listing of products that, whether you're on mobile or whether you're on a desktop, you want to just display a grid of items. So anything that you'd want to put in a grid that you don't care about having things structured in any certain way, you just want to let the browser decide. That is a perfect use of flexbox. Yep. Cool. Excellent idea. Somebody's cheating because we got too many of the same suited cards. All right, flexbox. Man, we're blasted through stuff. What would you guys like to do? We got like an hour and a half left. You guys want to build something together? Do you want to try playing? Continuing with.
Let's build something.
All right. What would you like to build? Let's throw out an idea.
Let's see what Leah wants to do. She seems excited.
Leah, what do you want to build? We built Andrew's fitness tracker.
No. I don't know. I didn't have anything in mind.
Anime watch list. What shows to watch? I don't know.
Netflix is another great example. You would maybe want to have like title cards. That would be kind of the perfect idea, right? If we wanted to use Flexbox, where we got a list of the movie titles the same height and width for the most part, and you want to have them in a row. And Netflix is a great example in that if we were building a Netflix type of interface, if you guys have used it recently, they have multiple rows of content based on category. Each of those individually could be its own Flexbox, and so rather than wrapping down to a line like we're doing here, right, they would do the overflow where they want you to scroll to the right or left. right? But they still want to have the same positioning, no matter how many titles. If they got 10 titles or 50 titles, they want them all to be, they'd probably use like flex start, right? So if they did justify content, it would be in here, and they'd say like flex start. Right? So it looks like this. So this would be like horror genre. This is romance or whatever. What would we like to build together? We got an hour and a half. Let's play. Who's got an idea? Or we can completely rebuild the fitness tracker using some of the new techniques we've learned. Maybe we have a better design now instead of the ugly red background thing that we were working on.
That sounds fun.
Okay. Going once, going twice. Fitness tracker.
Should we?
Yep.
I don't know. Maybe gears what we're gonna do. Try to put it into our portfolio.
Oh, maybe we build a portfolio or something. Or are you saying we should?
Yeah, because
build
we've got the
something that we
repo.
could put in our portfolio.
Yeah, because we have the repository for it. So I don't know, come up with something to put in there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think that's a better suggestion. We'll keep playing with the fitness tracker as we go, especially when we learn programming. But yeah, let's work on a portfolio, right? So I have my portfolio. We'll work on that one. You guys feel free to follow along, but I'll start thinking through how I would like to design and implement a portfolio. All right, so I'm gonna save all the stuff. Right, good. Open folder. All right, perfect. So I've got my blank file here. Right. I didn't do any extra work on the portfolio from when we started it. And if we pull up CBC 12 instructor, unstructor.github.io, we see I've got a gray background and just an empty page, right? Okay, so that's where we're at today. Let's go and make this not so bad. All right, so we're gonna take out all these style sheets. Okay, we've got one style sheet already. What has it got in it? All right, we set a font family. Awesome. First off, we probably want a better, just for the sake of making this easier to work with, we're gonna say, hey, the default is background color white. Let's go in here and set a base font because we probably want to use some relative styles. So we're going to say font size is 16 px, right? So for the body, let's actually use HTML here. Okay. HTML, comma, body. Right. So we're going to say on both the HTML element and the body, our base font size is 16, our background color is white. Okay, and if let's load this into our local browser so we don't have to, what is that? Wrong thing. So I'm going to right click and go open with live server. It's going to pull me up a page. Great. So this is where we're at. Okay. So locally on here, on GitHub, which is the repository remotely, it's gray still, right? But we don't want that. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to start thinking about my my sections, right? So I'm going to say, first off, I want to wrap this H1 in a header element, right? I want to say anything I put up here is going to be header. Okay. So it doesn't do anything, but what we're probably going to want to do is start breaking this down by sections. So I might even come in here and say, in my CSS, I want to start being intentional in what I'm putting in my CSS so that it's easier to navigate, right? Because this is going to be pretty big. So I'm going to say header. All my styles for the header are going to go up here. I'm probably going to want to put like contact details, contact section. Right. I'm going to probably want to put in a portfolio, and maybe I want to put in like a contact me form, contact form. Let's call this bio section. Right, I'm gonna make this about me, my bio. And then down at the bottom, I'm gonna have contact form and details. All right, so all I'm doing right now, this is one style of development that we're gonna probably talk about more when we start getting into the actual software side of things when we're learning JavaScript. I love working this way personally, and it works for me. I just want to share it with you, which is I'm going to go in and put in like top level comments to myself in my file. So right now, aside from these two selectors that we put in here, I have, this is a blank file. And so what I want to do is start sectioning off what I'm going to put by like first describing it in a comment. And I'll probably do similar things in HTML, right? So I might not do it with comments, but I'll come in here and say section ID equals bio, right? That was our next section. And then I'm going to have section ID equals portfolio, right? Section. And then I'm going to have section ID equals contact. And then I probably want a footer, right? I want to have something that is cutesy, right? So I'm going to have footer. We'll probably want to put that in here as well. So we'll say our footer is going to be in here also. Footer, right? And I don't know what any of the colors are going to look like yet. I don't know structurally how everything's going to be laid out, but I know that this portfolio is probably going to be, let's say, just as a hint for ourselves, like to do flexbox, right? All right, neat. So that's where we're at. Now, I've made some changes. What do we always want to remember to do? Let's check things into version control. So I'm going to use this source control over here, and I'm going to say stubbed out portfolio, right? So we haven't made any big changes yet, but we've got stuff in here, right? I don't need to push it to GitHub yet. What I'm probably going to do at this stage is start to think about, like, what is this page going to look like? So I know in my bio, I'm probably going to want an image source. So let's use one of our placeholders that we learned about before. Let's just pick something. Let's just grab any specific photo. Right. So I'm probably going to want an image in here. I'm going to have a picture of myself at some point because it's my portfolio. I'm going to come in here and let's say, all right. Yeah, and we want to put in an alt text, so I kind of know what I'm going to have here. Alt. This is Eric Harrison's picture, right? So I've given myself some alt text. Then I'm also probably going to want a paragraph. Probably going to want, like, hey, my name's Eric, I'm a software engineer, whatever, but I'll, just for the sake of, like, let's move fast, I'm going to put in 50 words of lorem ipsum text, right? And I'm going to hit Alt-Z because I don't like it when it doesn't word wrap. Okay, so let's take a look at what that gives us. So I've got everything still top to bottom because we haven't started putting things in place, but I do know that I'm probably going to want to have each section have a different color or a different like temperature, right, from a design perspective. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start adding some of that information. So I'm going to say the header, let's maybe make that maybe I want this to be like dark to light to dark to light. Maybe it just kind of that kind of alternate thing. I'm not a designer, so as I've said about a million times, like I'm gonna just iterate on this until it looks somewhat pleasant. So we'll come in here and we'll say header, background, color, 000, right? I'm gonna make it black, and let's make the color of everything in the header white, right? So that's great. One thing I noticed, I'm gonna definitely want to be in control of. I want this to be full width, and right now. Right, we've got a padding in here that comes from the HTML in the body. We don't want that. We want to reset everything. So I'm going to say padding equals 0, margin equals 0 in the HTML body. Right. So okay, good. I'm still getting some extra margin and padding, and if I had to bet, it would be coming from the H1 itself. So I can pull this up. I'm going to look at the computed style. We can see, yeah, I'm getting a ton of margin from this nonsense H1. So we want to get rid of that too. So I'm going to come in here and say, I'm going to give myself a new section in CSS, and I'm going to say global styles, right? And that, I think, I'd probably put as a comment above all these, right? So I'd say global styles, and I'm going to come in here and say H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, right? We don't want any margin or padding on those either. I'm going to be in charge of how my website looks. Great, so I've got that. Goes from black to white, good. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say in the bio section, we know that the bio we want to be white, so we'll say section bio, background, color, FFF, color 000, right? So I'm just kind of going through and setting things up. I know I have a portfolio section. I'm going to do the same thing, but I want the portfolio maybe to be black. So I'm going to go section portfolio. I'm going to do the opposite. 0, 0, 0, and FFF. Okay. So if I was to put something in the portfolio section, let's just put in another, just to verify that this all looks correct. Maybe I'll put in contact and in footer as well, just so I can see some content on the page. All right, so we can see it's starting to take shape, right? It's still ugly. It still has zero style that I can be proud of, but in the span of, 8 minutes, I've got the structure of what this can start to be. So the other thing, we probably want to just follow this on down. We know we needed to do flexbox. Right? That was a note for myself. Then I'm going to got my contact form details section, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy the white. I'm going to copy the black. Right. Then we need to make this, this is actually a footer element, so we're going to make this footer. And we're going to make this one section contact. Right? Those are our IDs. So now we can see we got the structure going from top to bottom. Everything is working great. Okay. All right. What we need now is, if I'm looking at this from the perspective of I'm designing this as if I'm on a computer. So I've got this second section. I might, depending on where my inspiration is, I might start from top down. Right. I might say, well, first off, I know that I want Eric's portfolio to be in the very middle of this section, and I want this to be big, right? So maybe I'd come in here first and say, we're in the header, right? Yep. So I would say header height is 100 view height, right? I want this to be the full view height of the page when you load in, right? Everyone following along? This is one of the relative units we learned, and now we know that no matter how big my browser is, when I load this page, it's going to be 100% view height. Okay? But I probably also want to put the header H1, right, rather than using font family Gill sans serif. I probably want to make this font family. I want to put this in everything. So let's move this up into our header. So now every font on this page is using this cool font that we picked, right? But I've got this header section. And I want to come in here and I want to say something like, I want my H1 in here, but I want it to be just the H1. Well, we only have one H1, so I think in this situation we can leave it exactly as is. But let's come in here and say align, V-line, vertical line, let's say middle, right? What does that do? Oh, we'd have to put it in here. So let's say vertical line middle. That didn't work. How would we move this into the middle of the page? Let's just align first. Text align. Yeah. Text align. Center. So that's going to get us close. Right? So now I've moved this in the middle of the page. And just for the sake of argument, because I don't want to go look this up yet, let's just say margin top. What's a good? Let's say 20 view height. Right. So I just want. Oh, I don't want to have margin. I want to do padding. Right? Because I don't want that black to disappear. Margin is going to push everything up, but I want to. Okay, that's still not high. Let's say. Let's just make this easy on ourselves. We know we're in the right spot roughly. Let's just say 40%. That's too much. 30%. Right. Yeah. Curve. All right. So I've got Eric's portfolio here. Now, maybe I want to have some text in here, perhaps that would say something directly under that. So let's just add that in here. Maybe we'll say H2. I am a software engineer, right? And I know this is not going to be final text. We can see, okay, that's got the same problem. I'm gonna have to align that to the left, text align center as well. So let's just say H2. And here's what we can do, right? So because we want to use text align center on both, I got a couple different options here. I might want to just give myself a global style that says dot TAC, right? Maybe that's shorthand for text align center. I'm gonna come in and say text align center, right? And so now rather than defining it in an H1 here and wanting to do it in an H2, I would just come through here and delete this and come in here and say class equals TAC. Class equals TAC, right? So I will often, when I'm working in CSS, when I've got a bunch of things like I'm going to want to add this padding or I'm going to want to add this type of justification, I'm going to make a little helper class like this, right? Pretty often. And now you can see I got both of them nicely aligned. Okay, that's great. But now I want to add some real cool style to this top before I leave. So I'm going to probably, for the sake of doing this here, let's learn how to add a nice background photo like this. So let's just add, let's just grab ourselves an image, maybe with some blur. Yeah. All right, so I've got an image. I want to put an image back here behind the scenes. So how would we add background image to CSS? So let's see. Background image. All right, cool. So it's exactly that property, and we could play with a few different versions of this as well, because we're going to probably want to make sure that it's centered correctly and that it's aligned correctly. So let's go back into our code. And I'm going to come in here into our header, and I'm going to say background image URL, and then paste that link, right? And there's a little CSS trick, and it's an HTML trick, right? Sometimes you'll see me reference a URL // and what that does is when we're putting in a URL, we have to put in HTTP like that or HTTPS like that. But if we take out the HTTP and the colon, it's going to do whatever version of the website I'm on currently. So if I'm on an HTTPS version, it's going to give the HTTPS version of that web page. If I'm on HTTP, it's just going to load HTTP. So this is a really handy shorthand. You just do 2 // You don't have to know what version of the site you're on. So if I put this here, right? Let's load this page now. Okay. It added a background image, but it is, let's make this bigger. So let's say 1024 by 768, right? Get something bigger. That's too big. Let's just do 600, see what happens. All right, we've got an image in here. What is it? Where's this image? Oh, that's my other image. All right. So what we probably want to do now is work on the mechanisms that background position top, and then we'll say background repeat, no repeat, background cool. So let's just see if that makes things a little bit better. Okay, that's close. We'll come back to that later because I think there's more we can do there to make this image look better. Probably maybe it needs to be blurred more, right? Blur 4. Yeah, that's pretty good. We're starting to get there. Blur 5, blur 6 maybe. Yeah, all right. Now we're worried maybe about the color, right? So maybe I'd want to come in here and how did they do this? I wanted to make it grayscale. I can do and grayscale. So if I load this now, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? I don't know. Let's see if there's a gray. Oh, because I misspelled gray. I spelled it the English way instead of the American way. Yeah, see? All right, that's pretty good. But now, even though that looks kind of like I want it to look, it's kind of hard to read the letters. So we probably are going to want to change this font color. Let's just make it something ridiculous for now, so we know to come back to it. I'm gonna get bright yellow. All right, cool. All right, so that's the top part. We still know we're gonna touch some stuff. We know we want to tweak things. You know, one of the things that jumps out to me is that I thought it was really nice that this loaded full screen to begin with, but maybe we want to make this like 90%, right? 90% of the view height, so that we know there's more stuff to come, right? So regardless of how big my browser is, if I load this page, I don't want it to take up the whole thing. But now you notice that the margin and padding we put in here to move this down has not. So we've got a few things to fix for sure. All right, what else would we do? All right, one thing we know we're going to want to do is we've got all these sections and everything is smushed over to the left and right. But what we probably want to do is just add a global style for sections so that all three of our major sections have, let's say, padding of, let's say, 5 rem. Right? That's going to give us, that's pretty good, right? Now it's automatically more readable, and I didn't do anything, right? That's free, right? So maybe 5 is too much. So let's make it maybe 4. Yeah, that seems pretty good. Okay, so we're making minor adjustments to our CSS in ways that is improving our overall page structure, and you see that we still have to work on the footer because we didn't give the footer any love. Where's this extra white space down here coming from? Is that from the? Yeah. Okay, so the P has a margin, so we're going to want to probably take that out as well. So let's go in here and say, just like we did with the H1s through H6, let's just say, P's don't get any extra free stuff off either, right? Perfect. So now we're getting there. But we will probably want some padding on our P's, maybe. I don't know. Go ahead, Liam.
How did you make it how did you make the header like the H1 like in the middle of the text in the middle?
Well, two ways. Inside the header, because we added text align center, we added that class. Text align center. So that makes it in the middle. And then the way we made it in the top, and this is the way that's currently broken, is we said, hey, padding top is 30%. So that's 30% total. But the problem is, it now is 30% regardless, and it's not shrinking with our page. So if we keep going, right, like you can see that it's starting to overlap some of our content here because we've said give us 30% from the top. That's probably not the right way to go about this. And you notice that like if we were in a different kind of page, right, this 30% is not really the correct unit of measurement we wanted to use here. So we know this is broken. Let's just take it out. All right, so now we're back to square one. It does not center itself. Now, this would be maybe one of the sections where you'd want to put a flex box in. And we want to come here and say display flex, right? Because we know that this header has 2 elements in it. And we maybe want to change the flex direction column, right? So now we've got them back to where we were. And then we maybe want to say flex, what was it? It was, let's pull up my reference here. Let's see. Gosh, too many tabs. So we got flag, yep. So justify content, not justify content, but align items. Right? So align items. We want to do center. Right? Does that work? No. Why did that not work?
What about
baseline?
positioning and transform?
What was the question?
What about position and transform?
Yeah, we could. I mean, so we could come in here and say, the position is absolute or fixed, right? And we could say top 20%, right? And so now it's moved that down. There are similar problems to that sort of positioning, and we might be able to fix that with flexbox, and you might be able to fix that with manual positioning. I just, in the context of doing this as like a live exercise, there are multiple solutions, multiple ways to do this, and I'm just trying to explore, as if I was building this for the first time, like how would I work this out, right? Oftentimes, especially when it comes to CSS, like I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to experiment and play until it gets to be what I'm looking for. So let's try that. Let's say it's not flexbox. Let's take out this, right? And we can do H1 position fixed, top 20%, right? And we need to do something about our H2 position fixed, top 20%. Right? What is this going to do? Okay, maybe this needs to be 30%, right? Okay, and then we probably need to do left 50%, right? Okay, so we know 50% is too much. So let's say left, or we can do left auto. Auto, right? Oh, that didn't work. 30%. I don't know. This is the sort of thing that, like, in the olden days of working in websites, right? Like, this was the hard stuff to work on, right? Like getting things to be positioned correctly. And I think that the correct modern solution is either to use grids or something like flexbox, because I think flexbox gives us a lot of this control without having to worry about where I'm going to manually put an item, right? Because you could also do, because the default is position relative, right? So it's going to be relative to the other thing that's with it. So that's pretty good. So we could take this out. We've kind of fixed our H2, let's say top 10%. Close. Yeah, so like this part is the part of CSS and design that I hate. Like, to me, the model that makes sense in my head from doing this forever is like I'm working on something that goes from top to bottom, and every once in a while I will have things that are columns from left to right, like that, like a traditional grid type view. But when I'm trying to place things within the context of like I want this to be centered nicely on the page, you know, most of the time I think the solution is some of these newer techniques, like saying, hey, this is display flex, right? So let's do this. Let's, for our H1, H2, just so we can use flexbox and try to like figure this out, let's add a border, 1px solid green, right? Just so we have something we can visually see what it's doing when we're flexing it, okay? And then let's, we did flex, direction, column, okay, great. So now we've got two columns on top of each other. That's awesome. That's what we're looking for. What are some other things? What were we playing with before? Align items is probably what I think we probably need to have. Align items. What are we doing? Probably want to do like center. Let's see what that does to our page. No, didn't do anything. But maybe we need to probably need to justify content first, maybe. Justify content, and we'll say center, just to see what that does. Oh, perfect. There we go. So that was what we needed. Is align items important? Nope, we don't need that at all. So we've just, with 3 lines of code, done a perfect version of what we were trying to do with a bunch of crazy stuff moving things around the page, right? Can you kind of see the power of Flexbox? And we can take out our border here. So now we've got a perfectly little rendered Eric's portfolio. I'm a software engineer. And because this is supposed to be my portfolio, I'm probably going to take out this nonsense and say Eric Harrison. Right? And I'll probably change the title to Eric Harrison as well. Right? This portfolio, I like to think of portfolio as like, this is my resume online. I'm trying to sell myself to whoever is here. But there's a bunch of really good developers who have an excellent portfolio that is something more quirky or unique to them. So you might say like Eric's dev shop or something, right? Just to show off some cleverness. But from the purposes of like, I'm starting this from scratch, let's assume that I'm just kind of making a portfolio page about me. All right. So we got this top section. We're not 100% happy with it. I don't love the font. I don't love this background image yet. We'll fix all that. But for now, it's structured kind of how I want. The only thing I can maybe think of as like, hey, it'd be really great to have this in here is maybe I would want to come in and put in a menu up here. Right? Menu. And I'd want to maybe... I don't like menu. I'm going to use nav. And then I'm maybe going to put in an auto list and say, what are our sections? We probably can skip over the current section because we're going to be there. But let's say, oh, I got an idea. Here's what I like better than having it inside my header. I'm going to have it above my header. So I'm going to have it be here. And I'm going to have my menu say li top, li bio, li portfolio, li contact me. Right? So I'm making this nice little navigation element. Okay, this obviously looks ugly, so we're gonna have to change that, right? We're gonna do that with CSS. So let's add ourselves a new section in here, and put it up here above the header. So we're gonna say menu or nav section. Nav. And we're gonna say nav, and we'll say it's fine by itself, but let's say background color 000 color FFF, right? So we've given ourselves, it's black. Now, why is it like that? We probably have extra margin on this element, right? So if I come in here and I check my nav element, we look at our computed. Okay, so it's not that, but it's probably our UL. Yeah, so our UL has a margin of 16. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say nav UL margin 0, padding 0. Okay, now we've got that, but now we've got a problem in that we've lost our little dots, but that's probably fine. I also definitely do not want my LIs to have list like a default disk, so I'm going to say list style none. Right, so now I've got 4 things. They don't look kind of how I want them to look like, but maybe what we need to do is use a we probably want to have this be a flexbox as well, right? So we can say nav. Let's actually do it in our nav. Oh, let's do it in our UL because we want this to be the container, right? So we'll say display flex, and then what did we use over here? We used flex direction, but we want this to be a row, right? We want to do justify content. We want this to be like a space between, maybe? Probably a good one to start with. Well, that's space evenly. Let's do space evenly. Oop. Okay. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm not crazy about the font, but you can see that if these were links and each of these took it. Now, the first thing that jumps out is like, hey, we probably want this to be, like we probably definitely want some kind of margin in here. So let's add, or let's do padding, right? Because we want the black to show up. So if we were going to shorthand this, let's say, because remember that these shorthand directions is clockwise, so it'd be top, right, bottom, left. So we'll do, let's do 1 view height, 0 view height, right? So top and bottom are going to be, that's not enough. Let's make this 4. See what that looks like. Cool. That looks pretty good. That's a good start. Oh, but there's a problem, right? It kind of grows. I don't want my menu to get huge. Maybe what we want to do is tie it to the font size. So instead of view height, we'll do like 5 rem. So it's going to be 5 times 16 because that's our font size up here. So do 5 rem 0. Oh, that's too much. 1 rem? Too much still. Let's do 0.5. So yeah, that's pretty good. Great. And then the cool thing is, if I make my font bigger, I still get a little bit of extra space, right? So it will gradually give me extra buffer around this. Now, the other thing I'm not crazy about is I wish that it was slightly transparent. So maybe let's change this to RGBA and say this is right, 0.5. So it's going to be half transparent. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, the cool thing is this is by default, right? We've got a flexbox in here, but I want the nav itself to be position. Let's see, what are our position? Sticky. Let's try position sticky. No, that didn't work. Let's say top 12%. Yeah, perfect. So now I got a menu that follows me down the screen. Right, that's pretty cool, right? And so now we know that if we got this menu that's following us around the screen, I probably want this top to be something different. So I'll just go back to top. Maybe I'll just put my name in here. And if they click on my name, it takes you to the top. Okay. Now, we learned how do we link to somewhere in the page. Does anyone remember? Now, we know how to make links. But how would I link to a spot in the page?
create IDs in the divs and then do a href with the hashtag to the ID.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the good thing is, because we've already designed our HTML pretty well, each of those elements we'd want to jump to, with the exception of header, right? So this one doesn't have one. So let's say header ID equals header. Right? They all have an element. So let's just say header, bio, portfolio. Right? Oh, we're missing something. We skipped a step. Right? So if I click on these, no, it worked. Neat. The one thing we didn't do is we didn't put another anchor tag in here, which is kind of probably best practice, but this way worked as well, right? Like the other way we would have done is a ID equals header, right? But we're just linking directly to the page, which I think works on most modern browsers. But then the other thing that this points out, now that we're working our way down this page, is, hey, this is purple. I don't want this to be purple. That looks ugly. So we probably need to design and style our anchor tags. So I'm going to do this globally because I think all of our anchor tags we want to look nice. So let's say color, RGB. Let's just do CBC, and then we're going to use the little color picker. I want like a nice light blue. Cool. So now I've got, not crazy about that. Let's just make it even lighter. Right? Yeah, it looks pretty good. Alright, I'm pleased with this. If I click portfolio, it takes me to portfolio. If I click bio, click Derek, it goes to home. Right? Pretty good. Alright, so that's one thing kind of working okay. I don't love it, but it's not the end of the world. Go ahead, Gregory.
No problem. Anything I do on my SEC is not showing on my HTML. I did the link. I did it. I make another file, so I did a link, but it's nothing showing.
Are you? Yeah, share your screen. We'll take a look.
Okay, wait a minute.
Flexbox is super cool. Normally, I would have bashed my head against the wall for about an hour trying to like figure out how to move that crap down. But Flexbox did it for us. All right.
I like Flexbox too. When I was learning about it, I was like, this stuff is awesome. It works so great.
All right, so let's go to your index.html and let's see how you have this referenced. All right, there's two major problems here. First off, in your CSS where it says link href, you have job card. The J is capitalized in that job card. The second problem is that it's really, really, really bad practice to put spaces in the names of your files, right? Because the way that browsers treat spaces is going to be different. You could have a file with a space, and if it's on a Linux server somewhere, it might expect to get %20, or it might expect a plus sign just based on the encoding type. So it's almost always better to have file names with no spaces. And if you want to put spaces, there's a couple ways to do it. You can either like use a dash or an underline, or sometimes we'll use what's called camel case, where you put like all the words smushed together, but every word gets a capital letter at the front of it. But you don't want to actually have spaces in your file names, generally. You can do it, but it causes more problems than it solves. So what I would recommend you do is take out the space between job and card. The other problem that is here is that you're linking to a file that is in the folder of the current file, right? So if you're on index.html, it's looking for a file in that folder called jobcard.css, but you put jobcard.css inside a CSS folder. So you need to include the full path. So you do /CSS /jobcard. So if you were like looking at the Explorer when it does the network, the network tab we were looking at the other day, and it shows you all the stuff that's loading, I would be willing to bet that when it loads the CSS file, it's going to show up as red, and it's going to say 404 file not found. So let's take out the space between job and card. Yep, and then let's save that file and rename your CSS file so that it doesn't have a space. So you can just right click on job card CSS and go to rename. Yeah, perfect. So hit enter. Yeah, there you go. Your colors appeared. Cool.
Okay.
Everyone's follow along with what we did there?
Yeah, I thought it was crazy.
Yeah, it's definitely a pain in the butt. All right, I'm gonna share my screen again. Does anyone else want to talk about anything before we go back to what we're doing? No. Nobody see? Am I on the right screen? Cool. All right, so we've got ourselves a cute little menu up here. Now, one cool thing we could do, maybe, nah, we're not do that yet. But we could use the pseudo selectors, and I'll just show, like, this is what my head was jumping to. It's like, I probably want some kind of spacing or some visual separator of this information up here. So maybe what I would do is I would come in here and say nav li after, and I would say content, let's just put a pipe in there, right? So now we learned this today, which is we add this little visual separator. And I would look at that and be like, okay, that's interesting. And maybe what we would do is use the last child nav li last child, and I would say content, right? Because we don't want it to appear at the end. And that isn't it. Oh, it's a real pseudo selector, not a last one. Right? I'll use this. Oh. li last child content. Why did it not take that out after the last one? That's weird. Let's try the other way. Nth child. Negative n. What does that do? Nothing? Whatever. But either way, I've put this after in there, and I see, that doesn't look right. The other thing I might try is I might say li border right 1px solid fff, right? See if that looks better. No, that still doesn't give us kind of what we're looking for because it smushes up the side. So I'd be like, okay, I'm going to figure that out later. Okay, and I would just abandon that line of thought because it doesn't look good visually, and I don't know how to, there's probably a better way to put visual separation in there. But for now, it's not a problem. Okay, so we've got a menu, follows us around the page. We can go to places. So the next thing we probably want to work on is let's work on our bio. So we know we want to have a picture of myself off on the left. Andrew abandoned the meeting. Bye, Andrew. I hope you come back. Welcome back, Andrew. All right, so we're working on the bio. I've got a picture. This is a placeholder picture. This is eventually going to be a picture of me. So let's go to our bio section. So the very first thing in our bio is the picture itself. So we got a picture here. The first thing we can do is we can go to bio, and then we're going to go to the P that's under it, and we're going to say just float to the left. Right? And it did. Right? Actually, we probably want to float. Let's try floating right and see what that looks like. No, it didn't do what we were looking for either. Let's float left. Let's do actually bio image float left. Cool. So that's closer to what we want. Let's take out the float here. Yeah, great. This is perfect. So what I've got is my image is kind of smushed in with my text so that it flows naturally together. This is like the original perfect use of float, right? Because you can see it kind of wraps around my content. But what I probably need to do is add a little bit of margin to my image. So we're going to say margin right. Let's just say, I don't know, 1%. Let's just see what that looks like. That's pretty good, but I probably need more. Right? So maybe what I want to do is 5%. That looks pretty good. Yeah, maybe what we actually need, because we want it to adapt to our font size, we want to use something like 2 rem. Let's see what that does. That's too much. 1 rem. Let's say we want it to be 1 of whatever. That's too much. Maybe 0.75 rem. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So now, that's still too big. Let's go to 0.5. Alright? Yeah, I like that a lot. So now, what we have here is our image flows naturally within our text, as if we just like dragged a photo into the page, which to me feels pretty good. But I also think like I probably need a heading, so I'm probably going to want to come into my HTML and above all this, you know, put in H2, be like about Eric. Great. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I don't know if I like it there. I might want to come in here and do the same thing. Class TAC, text align center, right? That class we gave ourselves. Yeah, that's pretty good. But I don't like that. It's doing something here that I'm not crazy about. Where are we getting this extra margin from? I don't know. Is it from the image? So I maybe at this stage want to just inspect all the elements and try to figure out where does this section bio come from? I don't know. There's extra white space up here, and I'm not crazy about it. But I don't know why the About Eric is so far down. So maybe it's from our sections, right? We have it's from here, padding for REM. So top, right, bottom, left. We probably want top and bottom to be 0 or much smaller, right? That's too much. So let's do REM, 1 REM, top and bottom. There we go. Now we've kind of fixed our problem. But now we can see, because we floated this information over here, now the section below it is causing us to have a problem. So what we'll probably want to do is come into here, and we want to add to our section content so that it prevents anything that's floated. We want to say clear both. All right, so it's going to say if there's anything that's floated outside of the normal float of the information, we want to have that clear. But now there's a problem in that because this is floated, we've lost our padding, our nice little padding that was there from the sections, right? As soon as there's not any text content, that beautiful margin disappears. So what I'd probably want to do at this stage, and this is like just artistic at this point, like there's nothing in here of value that we're doing. I might come in here and say, let's give ourselves a border 1px solid green, just for sake of argument. Let's say height is what is this? What is the size of our image here? 200, 250 px, and width 250 px. And maybe we'll do a background color like a light gray. So let's do like a CCC maybe. Okay. So what we need to do is, because I'm operating on the image, what I really want to do is create a container around that image. So I'm going to come in here and do that, because I want to style. I want to create like a border around this image that looks real nice. So I'm going to say div ID equals headshot. Right. This is a picture of me eventually. Div. Okay, and then I'm going to come back into our CSS, and I'm going to take out this stuff I did here. And I'm going to say bio. Actually, I can just reference it directly. Headshot. Right? So I gave it an ID. I'm going to say poop. And let's take out bio. Let's say headshot image. Right? Because now it can be more explicit. Okay. So now I've got this box. I've got a box around my box, around my picture, which is kind of what I'm looking for. Except now my text doesn't float nicely because we'd put the float on our image. So this doesn't need to float anymore, but this needs to float. So I'm going to float left. Great. So that's kind of back to working. Okay, that was how it was before. But I want my image to be centered inside of this element. So let's come in here and let's try margin auto. Right, let's take this out. Oh, we probably want this on our box. How would I go about doing this? Let's see. I've got my box here, and what I'm trying to do is just create like a light gray border around my image centered inside this. So we probably want to have in here, let's actually just do this. Padding, 10px. So I'm going to put a padding around all sides of this box. So in theory, yeah, our image should be correct. But now what I want to do is take out the height and width, because I want the box, the padding itself, to control that. And now I know, hey, this green that I was using for debugging purposes, I actually want this to be, let's just say like a nice black, but let's not make it all black. Let's make it like 666. No, that's too light. Let's do 323. Yeah, okay, that looks pretty good. But then we also need a margin bottom. And what were we doing as our padding for sections? We were doing padding 1 rem. So I'm going to use that same thing, but make it a margin. So it forces, this headshot has a force of padding at the bottom that matches the padding at the top, right? So I've said this is the biggest element in this section, unless I put way more content in here. But I always want to make sure that I've got at least this much padding before the next section. And now I've got this image. I probably also want to make, I mean, this image doesn't really pop like this. So let's see if we can border 1px. So hard. I don't love it, but I don't know what I want to change it to yet. But I like the contrast. So I've got a picture that feels like it's in a frame. Maybe what I want to do is change this to be FFF. We can maybe pick a like a tan. I think it's a kind of a faded Polaroid or something. That's cooler. All right. I like it. That's not bad. All right. I'm happy with that for now. I'm happy enough to move on. All right. On to the bios, or on to the portfolio. So definitely in the portfolio, I know I'm going to 100% want this to be a flexbox where I'm showing off cards. So maybe the first thing I'm going to do is design a really nice card. All right, so let's just save our work first. We can say initial design of bio section. Right? Cool. So I'm in here. I'm in my portfolio. I know I don't want this nonsense text. That's all garbage. But what I probably want to do is just come in here and say div class equals project. Right? So all of my cards in here are going to be a class of project. So I'm going to have as many as I want here. So div class equals project. Right? I'm going to have a couple. All right, I'm definitely going to want to have, I'm probably going to want to have a title. So I'm going to do H3. So up here I'm going to do H2, and I'm going to say, oh, okay. So this points out a problem. So I'm going to want a heading in here to be like cool projects. Right? I definitely want a title in here. But the problem is, if I was planning on using this section as my flexbox container, it would flex this H2 as well, which I don't want. So what I'm going to want to do is just create a brand new div in here. I'm going to say div, let's just make it a class. Class equals container. Okay. I'm going to close my div. And I'm going to move all of my elements that are inside of it up. So really I just want to focus on making one look really good. And then I can copy that for however many projects I have. And as I continue to add projects, if I, this could just as easily be, a resume, right? And I could build a visual resume that shows from most recent employer to oldest employer. It could be something as simple as a logo to a website that links to my previous employer. Like I don't have to. This is my portfolio. I can just maybe we'll make that as another section going forward. In fact, that's what we're going to do because I like this idea. So we're being creative now. So we'll say cool projects, and okay. So we have our H2. We probably want to make this class text align center so that it's in the middle again. Now we got a container. We're probably going to want an H3 in here because that's our third level heading. And I'm going to say project 1. And then I'm probably going to want an image, and it's probably going to be source equals, let's use our placeholder. Let's use this website. And let's just do this one, 150. Cool. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say bloop, 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 image source equals this. Don't do that. Whatever you do. Okay. And we're going to definitely pull alt. So I'm going to say alt equals project 1. All right, so if I go back to our page, all right, got project 1. Okay, that does not look super cool. We're in a black. I probably want to do something like I did up here, where I'm going to want to make like each of these have its own background. Maybe I'm going to need an extra level of container, right? So I'm probably going to come in here and play with it like this. I'm going to say, okay, this code is correct. I like the way this looks. I probably want to make this class equals text align center. Okay, and even though it's going to break for this, it will fix itself once we turn this container into flexbox. But I probably want to come in here and say, all right, where are we at? All right, section portfolio. I know I need a container. I need this to be display flex. What are our other ones that we use pretty often? Let's just flex direction. Yep. So I'm going to do flex direction, not column, but row, because we don't want it to go up and down like the other one did. And justify content center. Great. So perfect. I've got a card in here. But now I need to come in here and add our, what do we call them, projects? Did I just give it one name? Yep, project. So project, I want to give it a background, color, FF, border, 1px, solid, black. Okay, so now I've got that. Perfect. Where did my content go? Oh, it's there, but okay. And then color, 000. Okay. So perfect. But I also want there to be a little bit of padding in here, so I'll do padding. Let's do 0.5 rem. Let's just see what that looks like. Cool. Why is there a border over here? Let's inspect. What is that border coming from? Let's actually change the border to green. Is this the border? Yep. For some reason, that border is there. But if we look at... Oh, because I got an extra... Okay. It's because we have two things in here. So let's go. Bloop. Delete that. Right. So we're just working on one specific card. Everybody's happy. This looks okay. But we probably need a different color because that green is not going to show up. Or if we made this black, right? Because black border with a black background is nothing, right? It merges into each other. So we probably need something different here. Let's maybe go, let's split the difference and go like 888, right? So it's like a light gray. Still not very visible. Maybe we want to make this background light gray. Maybe we don't need a border at all. Let's try without a border. Cool? Yeah, that's fine. All right, so that's project 1. If I was to come in here and make another project, right, I can add a project, add a project, add a project. Let's say 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. So we've got our projects in here, but that does not look super great. But what we are going to do is come back to our CSS and say, instead of justify content center, we're going to say justify content space evenly. Cool. If I, okay, I got to add a wrap. So how did we add that? Flex wrap. Wrap. Cool. All right, so that looks pretty good. All right, I got a nice little portfolio here that scales with the amount of projects I have. If I'm on mobile, it will display up and down. We probably want to add some spacing between them. All right, so how do we do that? What is, we probably want to do, so we got justify content align. item, align content, space around, maybe? Let's try that and see if that gives us align content, space around. That give us extra space? No. Still have everything smushed together. Align items, maybe? Align items. Baseline. Let's see what this does. No. But we could probably come into project and say margin top like a 1 rem. Yeah, there we go. That looks pretty good. Yeah, I like that. That looks pretty sharp. And then the more portfolio items we add in here, obviously the I don't like that the padding between them. So let's, instead of space evenly, let's do space around, maybe. Will that keep them from shrinking? Not perfectly. We could probably do margin left 1 rem and force a minimum width between these. Yeah, okay, now it snaps. That's real snappy. So, okay, let's go back to space evenly. Okay. Yeah, I like that. So as soon as it gets to a part where it can't have that margin, it's going to snap to the next line. So that makes me happy. I'm pleased with this portfolio. Any questions?
So when we progress a little further, are there going to be ways to lay out sites in other ways, like with JavaScript or?
In general, you're probably never going to lay out a site in JavaScript, and I say that with there's a 1,000 caveats that I could give you a list. Like, there are JavaScript specific frameworks like React or Angular where you might actually be laying things out with JSON that describe how to structure the page, but in general, you're always going to lay out the site with CSS. JavaScript is for the interaction. So if I wanted to make it so that if I clicked on this, it did something. And when we get down to like the contact me form, like being able to submit that contact so that it actually does something, like we would use JavaScript to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't think of many exceptions where the answer is, yeah, you pretty much just always going to use CSS. How you will differ, like we've been laying this out the hardcore way, where we're going from top to bottom and styling our content exactly how we want it for this specific product. But you saw when we were working on the activity tracker from last week, we were intentionally saying like, this is the layout we want to use, and then positioning elements that way. When we later this week, we're going to be using like CSS grids, which is like even more advanced than flexbox. We're going to say like, this is in column 1, this is in row 2 or whatever, and we're able to like specifically structure our page into like sections, where this is more like flexbox is really useful at like letting the browser put things in a spot that looks aesthetically pleasing, and like kind of how we're doing here, where we want it to like flow with the content. But grid would be more for like actual layout, where you're saying like, this is my menu column, this is my whatever column. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. CSS, I mean, the reason we spend so much time on this is that like, even when you're doing JavaScript and you want it to change a look or feel, right? Like you're still behind the scenes using JavaScript to set CSS properties.
Can you use flexbox within CSS grid, like in
Yes.
combination?
Mm-hmm. Everything that we've learned to date, and this is why we spend so much extra time on CSS, is that even when we get to JavaScript, you're still going to be using CSS, and all of the things we put together should be in your toolbox of things that you know to reach for, so that like, if I needed to lay out a bunch of cards like this, I'm probably going to want to use Flexbox. If I'm designing a site, I'm probably going to want to use CSS Grid or something along that lines. And then even within Grid, there's like a whole bunch of different design philosophies that will use it slightly differently. But as long as you understand this is what a selector looks like, these are the properties, even if you don't memorize all the properties, because I'm looking them up all day long when you see me, like when we're here doing this, like you don't have to memorize everything. You just have to kind of know what you're trying to do. And then I'll harp on this forever, which is like, you're always, for the rest of your career, going to just remember that you can do something, and you're going to Google, like, using flexbox to lay out cards, right? So I would just look this up and be like, oh, here's how I'd use flexbox to make this kind of layout. It's going to teach you, right? If you're not doing that, if your day job is not front-end developer or front-end designer, and you're not literally making layouts day in and day out, you might touch this 2, 3, 4 times a year. Because most of your time, when we start getting into the programming side of things, you're going to spend, for every hour you spend on the front end, you're going to spend 20 hours making it do something in a database and making it like actually work, right? The amount of effort that goes into building a page, aside from static pages like this where we're just going to put some content on there, you see, I've built a pretty reasonable portfolio in less than an hour. But if I wanted to like build the form to make this contact us, we'd probably spend another hour, and that's just for a simple form.
Yeah.
That was excellent. Any other questions? So we can continue playing with this tomorrow. We got 30 minutes left tonight. Coming up next, the last section that we have to really build and prototype out would be, I'd want to build a contact form or contact details on here. So that would be just simply going in here and saying, okay, well, the next section is, just like we were doing before, I'm going to come in here and put an H2 class TAC, contact me, right, H2. And then instead of having a paragraph, I might say I might still put a paragraph in here and be like, the best way to reach me is to use the form below, right? And then I would put in a form action equals index.html, method equals post, right? So input type equals text, name equals your name, placeholder, store name. Right? And so just building a form, just like we've been doing the other day. I would style it nicely. I'd probably put the form inside of a nice gray box or something. And then I would have the entire structure of this website done. This would be my portfolio. And then I would start going through here and be like, okay, now everything's laid out. How do I want this to feel? Like, I might actually go and pick, rather than using this unsplash me background header, I might find an image that I think represents me and be like, oh, I like this picture. I'm going to make that always the picture that loads. Then I'm going to say, okay, we know this yellow sucks. What color would I actually want this to be? And I'm probably going to first have to pick that background image before I can decide on what color I want my font to be. Then I'm going to put a picture of me in here, and depending on what size picture I have, I might need to change the size of this box. Then I would actually write my content. So this is, I'd write something about myself. Then I'd put in my projects if I had any. But maybe the first project is, everybody's project one is this portfolio, and you just kind of leave it as a bit of a joke where it's a link to this page. And so it's like an infinite loop. Like, that's pretty funny. I'd laugh at that if I was an employer. And then, when we actually get into writing code, you make it so that the form actually sends you an email. And then our footer, we want it to be like all okay. Copyright and 2021. So now I've got a footer. And I think this footer is too damn big. So I'm going to come in here and say font size 0.7 EM. And then I'm also going to say, I'm probably going to want to make it so that this is centered. So I'll probably come in here and reuse that same class we've used everywhere, text line stuff. So now I've got a nice little, maybe I want to put it so that margin 1, no, padding. I'm going to use padding, right? Padding. There you go. Now I've got a nice little footer. And I'm probably going to go in, as my next step, because this is supposed to be a reflection of me, I'm probably going to make, we've got black and white here. I'm probably going to want to make this like a dark blue instead of black. I'm probably going to want to change my fonts. Maybe I like this font for my headings, but maybe for the paragraphs, I want it to be something else, like Arial. Right? And we can do that just by saying font family Arial. we say not book. So anything that's in a, yeah. So now I've got 2 different fonts. So at this stage, I would just iterate until I was really, really proud of what I did. But now I have a thing that when I push it to GitHub, right, if I commit all my changes and I say first version kind of done needs content, right? And I push this to GitHub, right, because this is linked to our GitHub IO account. Right? I come in here. In about a minute, when GitHub gets around to putting it on their server, this will be nice and look good. Any questions? We have 20 minutes left. Is there anything you want us to go over? Tomorrow we're going to be learning about animations, and then we'll probably start diving into CSS grids. Animations is one of those things where it's a cute little trick. You might use it occasionally, but I don't know what for. You go ahead, Gregory.
Yeah, I was about to ask that.
Well, so like, to give you some examples, on a previous version of a website we built, we had a little like character. It'll be used maybe mostly in marketing. So if you're doing a marketing-facing website where you're trying to get people interested in a product, you might have it so that when you're scrolling, if you work for a soda company, you might have a can of soda like slowly tilt and look like it's pouring into a glass, right? Like you can do that with CSS very easily. But the time and energy that goes into using CSS for animations, like I'm a software engineer. I build things that people interact with. I don't really, in my experience, I don't work with that kind of thing. But you guys might. If you go work in an agency or a company building stuff for clients where they want something cutesy, you might spend all day doing animations. Like I just don't. But I'll show you how to work with them, and I'll show you how to like figure out how to make it do stuff. But I don't often. Then we'll talk about. There are some that are interesting transitions, especially when we're talking about like cool effects over text, some shadows, and just some more stylistic things that can add some spice to your pages. Again, like most of this stuff is like if you're just building web products, like stuff people are supposed to interact with, you're never going to add a shadow on something probably, but it's important to know how to do it so that like it used to be before shadows existed as a great example. Like I would go and make a logo that looked really good in Photoshop and add shadows and make it look like artistically like the logo I wanted to do. Now you can do all that with CSS if you so desire. But aside from like logos or headings, you might not ever. What else? Was it useful to go through build? Yeah, see, now I got a cool portfolio page. Neat. On GitHub.
What are the project cards? Like, how does that work? Yeah, like what are we gonna put in there, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's gonna depend a lot on you, right? Oftentimes, if I was going to do a portfolio like this, there's a couple different types of roles that I think really lend itself well to portfolios like this. Software developers, for one. Like I might come in here and put each and every product I've ever built, and maybe it's just a logo to the product, or maybe I take a screenshot of the web interface and I put it in this image box. I think especially in the context of like everyone in this class as a student, like we start working on projects, you should put those in your portfolio. You should be like, this was the activity tracker project. This is my plushy sales website. Anything you work on that you're proud of, you should put in here. And even if all it does is link to a GitHub repository and not to like a live website, that's perfectly fine. If you're trying to get a job as a software engineer, that would go here, right? You want to show off the stuff that you've done that you can stand behind, that let employers know that you are someone who has performed in this type of role. Other professions, like if you were an architect or if you were, a photographer, I'd put in like pictures I was proud of in here, right? It could be anything in the context of like showing this off. I just use this as an example because it's a really good way to show off flexbox, because if this was my portfolio page and I was really trying to like display all the stuff I'd done in my career, this would grow over time. So every year I'm maybe adding 1 or 2 new projects in here that I'm really proud of, and I'm just putting them in here. I don't have to worry about designing this little card anymore because I already designed it once, and all I have to do to add more of them is I just come in here and I'm in the wrong file. I just come in here and I say, oh, here's my new project. I'd come in here and say, I worked on my portfolio, right? And instead of having an image, I would come in here and I would maybe take a screenshot of my portfolio, and maybe what we'll do is we'll make it small so we can take ourselves a quick screenshot, and we do something like this, and we say, so I'm just taking a screenshot, and I'm gonna save this. Say screenshot. Wait, where are we at? CBC 12. I need a folder for images. New folder images. And I'm gonna come in here and say, this is my portfolio. Okay. And so rather than using this placeholder image, I would come in here and say, images portfolio.png. Right, so every time I've done something that I think is worthwhile of adding to my portfolio, I would come in here and I just added it. Okay, so here's another thing we just discovered, right? We had these beautifully designed cards, but I just added an image that was too big. So what we want to do is come into our CSS and say, no matter what size image goes in here, I want it to be project image. I want it to be width 150 px. Yeah, cool. So that's the kind of thing I would put in there. I would put some kind of image that shows it off. But if it was something that I was just proud of, I worked there, I maybe would just put a logo. And this is just one treatment. Like on my actual portfolio, right? I have like these are some things that I'm proud of working on. I put logos and I gave a little bit of a bio about it, and it's a link to the page. And then maybe you want to put in a skills thing, and you want to say I'm really good at PHP, I'm really good at Docker, like whatever you want. The portfolio is really your chance to express yourself to someone that is looking. So, I'll see. I used that same kind of menu before. Nice. Cool. Yeah, I'm proud of myself. I created the same thing I already did. Good job, me. But
I could tell you were having a lot of fun. Having fun making that.
Yeah. I love that kind of stuff. Right? Like it's cute. But we could also just as easily come in and be like, oh, that's driving people crazy. I don't like it. Where would we put it? It's the nav over the top, and we say position fixed. Right. Oh, right. So that falls down the screen, but it keeps it in place. Oh, because we put top here. Take that too. Right. So when it comes to CSS and when it comes to design, the design aspect of things, there's no right or wrong answer. Oftentimes it's just trial and error, figure out what works, figure out what doesn't work, place things in a spot, and then see if it looks good. The process I showed you today is exactly how I work on front end stuff all the time. Any other questions? Anything you want to go over? Alright, well, if there's nothing, I will pause the recording